Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations so that, setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honorable Paula Gopi-Schoon, Senator the Honorable Richie Sukai, Senator the Honorable Hassel Bacchus, Senator the Honorable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, and Senator Wade Mack, all of whom are out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Ms. Yukima Betelmi, whereas Senator the Honorable Paula Gopi-Schoon is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Carla Kangaloo, President as aforesaid, in the exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Yukima Betelmi, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 7th of November 2023 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator the Honorable Paula Gopi-Schoon. To Mr. Ndali Young, whereas Senator the Honorable Richie Sukai is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Ndali Young, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 7th of November 2023 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator, the Honorable Richie Sukai. To Mr. Michael Seals, whereas Senator the Honorable Hassel Bacchus is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Carla Kangaloo, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Michael Seals, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 7th of November 2023 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator the Honorable Hassel Bacchus. To Mr. Harvey Boris, whereas Senator the Honorable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Carla Kangaloo, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Harvey Boris, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 7th of November 2023 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator the Honorable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal. To Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, whereas Senator Wade Mark is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Carla Kangalo, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)A and Section 44(4)B of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Tim Gopi Singh, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 7th of November 2023 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator Wade Mark, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, the 7th day of November 2023. Honorable Senators are required to take the oath.
I, Yukima Bethelme, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Ndala Young, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Michael Sears, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Harvey Boris, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Tim Gopi Singh, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Honourable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Establishment and appointment of members to Joint Select Committee, Representation of the People Amendment No. 2 Bill 2020. At a sitting held on Wednesday, November the 1st, 2023, the House of Representatives agreed to the following resolutions. Resolved, that the Representation of the People Amendment No. 2 Bill 2020 be referred to a Joint Select Committee hereby established, that this committee be mandated to adopt the work of the Joint Select Committee in the third session and report by March the 29th, 2024, and that subject to the concurrence of the Senate on the establishment of the Joint Select Committee on the Representation of the People Amendment No. 2 Bill 2020, this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on this committee. Mrs. Camille Robinson-Regis, MP. Mr. Colm Imbert, MP. Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, MP. Mrs. Shamfa Kujo Lewis, MP. Mr. Saddam Hussein, MP. And Mr. Davendranath Tanku, MP. Accordingly, I respectfully request that the Senate be informed of this decision at the earliest convenience, please. Thank you. Yours respectfully, Bridget Mary Aniset George, Speaker of the House. Honourable Senators, I wish to advise that a delegation from the Legislative Assembly of Montserrat, comprising the Honourable Shalina White, Speaker of the House and Leader of the delegation, Dr. Judith Baker, Clerk of the Legislative Assembly, and Ms. Francelise White, Commission's Analyst, are present in the chamber for today's proceedings. I ask you to join me in welcoming the delegation to the Senate of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Papers.
Minister of Public Administration.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the order paper in my name. The Annual Administrative Report of the Statutory Authorities Service Commission for the financial year ended September 30, 2021. Thank you, Mr. President.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the names of the Minister of National Security, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Housing and Urban Development. The ministerial response of the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Finance, and the response of the Auditor General to the 14th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the implementation of the recommendations contained in the 24th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee from the 11th Parliament on the processing of the payment of pensions and gratuities of retired public officers and contract employees. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to the 13th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the management and operations of the Housing Development Corporation, HDC, including the restructuring of the HDC into 3 distinct state enterprises.
Reports from committees.
Senator Laurel Lizama Leasing.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to present the following reports as listed on the order paper in my name. The 11th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, 3rd Session, 12th Parliament, on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2019 and 2020, and follow-up on the implementation of the recommendations in the committee's 2nd report from the 11th Parliament. The 12th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, 3rd Session, 22-23, 12th Parliament, on the follow-up inquiry into the committee's omnibus report in the 1st session of the 11th Parliament, and the Joint Select Committee on the State Enterprises report from the 2nd session, 12th Parliament, including an examination of the National Infrastructure Development Company Limited, NIDCO, audited financial statements for the years ended 2015 to 2017.
Urgent questions?
Senator John.
To the Minister of Public Utilities, given recent reports that the Prime Minister's private information has leaked due to cyber attack on TSTT, can the Minister state if any other Cabinet Minister, Member of Parliament, or Senator has been affected?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Government of Trinidad and Tobago has mandated the Board of TSTT to conduct a thorough and independent investigation into the cyber attack of October 9th, 2023. I am advised that the Board has already taken steps towards facilitating the commencement of this probe. Additionally, TSTT is still in the process of evaluating all aspects of the attack, including the validation of all reported information in the public domain, that is, the personal data of all our citizens, inclusive of members of Cabinet and parliamentarians. I am advised that this is being done on a customer-by-customer basis. At this point in time, Mr. President, I do not have any report before me that confirms that the personal information of members of Parliament have been affected by this data breach. However, as a result of the investigation become available, I will be in a position to provide further clarity on this ongoing situation to the national community. Mr. President, this situation remains of significant concern to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and all resources are being made available to address this problem.
Senator John.
President, it appears as if the Minister is the last man to know in all of these undertakings at TSTT, because this morning
Senator
papers...
John, do you have a question?
Yeah, you do have a question, because I'm saying, I don't understand what the Minister is saying. Mr. President, what are the plans of the TSTT to inform customers individually that their data has been compromised? Because this could lead to... We are living in...
You have asked the question.
That's the question, Mr.
Minister.
President. Thank you.
President, and that's the reason why we've asked for an independent investigation into this matter. The question was premised on information pertaining to the Honorable Prime Minister being leaked in the public domain. I have information, Mr. President, that the report in yesterday's Guardian that refers to one Keith Rowley is not that of the Honorable Prime Minister. And that is the reason why that this matter warrants an independent and thorough investigation so that we can truthfully report to the public on this very critical issue.
Senator Roberts.
Honorable Minister, you stated independent, but how can you ask the board, which may be part of this investigation, as you have alerted the population that the board misled the Honorable Minister and the Cabinet? How can a board who's part of the investigation conduct an independent investigation?
So I will not allow that question.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, the government is prepared to answer all of the questions on the order paper, which would, for oral response, which would be questions number 1, number 2, number 3, number 28, number 29, number 30, number 42, number 46, and number 47. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator John.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 1 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Leader of Government Business.
Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. NGC, as the domestic gas aggregator, purchases gas from all upstream gas suppliers, and any changes to upstream gas prices, including EOG's cost of gas, are incorporated into the NGC's weighted average cost of gas as part of its overall operations and sales to its downstream customers. There are no significant implications, therefore.
President,
Senator John.
can the minister confirm or deny the disclosure by EOG in the 2022 report, financial report, that they sold gas to NGC for US $4.45 per million standard cubic feet?
Minister.
I am unable to answer that question at this time, but if the question is posed, it will be answered in the usual manner.
Senator John.
Mr. President, can the minister specifically state if this will lead to a disproportionate increase in the price of gas paid by downstreamers to NGC and impact their competitiveness, the cost of their product, and of course their further competitiveness?
Minister.
I would suggest, Mr. President, that the Senator put that as a question on notice and it will be answered in the usual manner.
Senator John, any more supplementals?
Yes, Mr. President. It's amazing that the Minister of Energy believes that he's above the Parliament. Mr. President, would the Minister then agree that the unilateral intervention of the Prime Minister to negotiate a deal without the Chief Technical Office and Accounting Officers of NGC, etc., and the highly specialized technocrat in the NGC is not just a debacle, but has really resulted in multi-billion-dollar negative consequences? That's the question. If the negative consequences as a relative to the Prime Minister and his Minister of Energy negotiating deals in Houston.
So that question does not arise. Next supplemental.
Mr. President?
Do you have another supplemental?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, in light of the transparency showed by EOG, a company ranked 186th on the Fortune 500, is it possible that NGC will tell the country what BPTT and Shell have paid for gas during a similar period?
Minister.
Question number 2. Mr. President, the Senator is making all sorts of statements, and I would ask that any such question be put as a question on notice. It will be answered in the usual manner. I'm sorry, I cannot respond to wild statements from the opposition.
Senator John, are you asking the next question on the order paper?
Question number 2 to the minister. Exactly.
Senator John, take a seat. Senator Naked. Senator Naked. Senator John.
Question number 2 to the Minister of his clone in Energy and Energy Industry.
Minister of Finance.
As of today, there are no arrears on principal amounts owed by TNTEC to TGU. However, there is an amount related to interest on previous arrears to TGU. This matter is being addressed between the parties.
Senator John.
Mr. President, could the minister state if these major debts owed to TNTEC by the state whether it has led to the increase in consumer TNTEC rates?
Minister. Sorry, Mr. President, there was a second part of the question. Part 2. And the answer is, a similar question on this matter was answered by the Minister of Public Utilities in the House of Representatives on September the 8th, 2023. There has been no significant change since then, and the information is available on the Parliament's website. So perhaps now the Senator can ask the supplemental.
Senator John.
Mr. President, can you indicate to the Senate if the amount outstanding to TGU and TNTEC were factored into the final determination of electricity rates as presented to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by the RSC, as this is ultimately what is being used to justify TNTEC rate increase?
No, Senator John. Listen,
yes,
members. So we ask a question, and to tack on statements onto the question isn't allowed. So there's one question that I've heard just now. Minister, question has been asked.
Mr. President, it's quite ridiculous to ask questions about the Regulated Industries Commission. Mr. President, what's going on?
So have a seat. It's been a little while, I know, since we've gone through this particular process as it relates to questions to oral answer. So I'm getting a lot more crosstalk than I'm used to in this process. Let the process run its course. Ask the question succinctly, and the minister, if allowed to do so, will answer the question succinctly. Minister.
Yes, Mr. President, it is, in my opinion, quite ridiculous to ask a supplemental question about the Regulated Industries Commission on a question about the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. It is impossible to answer that question based on the original question, and I would therefore ask the Senator, put the question on notice. It will be answered in the usual manner.
Senator John.
Mr. President, could the minister state if the government will be willing to ensure that all state government of Trinidad and Tobago debts to TNTech are paid, thereby providing a lifeline to TNTech to postpone any rate increases for the upcoming fiscal year?
Minister.
Mr. President, the government continuously provides appropriations and allocations to state entities, ministries, and departments to clear their arrears to utility companies.
Senator John.
Question number 3 to the Honorable Minister.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Pricing at Atlantic LNG is a confidential component of commercial contract arrangements. Accordingly, specific details cannot be provided.
Senator John.
Mr. President, EOG published their pricing. Everything is secret with this government.
Senator John, that's
so
a statement.
I will
I'm
have
looking
no
for a
other
question.
questions because this minister can
So
answer
then take
nothing.
a seat, Senator John. If there are no questions, again, I'm going to say it. This process is very simple. A question is asked on the order paper. The senator asking the question is invited to call out the number. The minister to whom the question pertains answers the question, and there are supplemental questions allowed. There are not statements to be made within this process. Senator Leiter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 28 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
So, Senator Leiter, question number 28 on the order paper says to the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance.
Even better. Even better.
I'm ready.
So who's going to answer the question? The order paper says Minister of Finance. Minister of? The Minister of Finance.
Yes, me.
Mr. President, while the July 2023 Economic Bulletin provides valuable insights, it is important to note that the employment data presented in that report is now outdated. In September 2023, the Central Statistical Office released more recent employment data up to the second quarter of 2023, which reflects improving employment conditions in both the transport, storage, and communication and construction sectors. In the construction sector, the data reveals a substantial improvement in the number of employed individuals from 64,900 in the first quarter of 2023 to 78,400 in the second quarter of 2023. Similarly, within the transport, storage, and communication sector, the number of employed individuals increased from 28,900 persons in the first quarter of 2023 to 34,200 persons in the second quarter of this year. Accordingly, an additional 13,500 persons were employed in the construction sector in the second quarter of 2023 compared to the first quarter of 2023. Further, the number of additional persons employed in this sector was 15,400 when a comparison is made to the first quarter of 2022. So 15,400 new construction jobs have been created during the first 6 months of 2023. In the transport, storage, and communication sector, Mr. President, an additional 5,300 jobs were created in the second quarter of 2023 alone. Clearly, the government's efforts to create jobs in these sectors are yielding very positive results. As a result, this question is totally irrelevant and misleading, since in no way could any reasonable person infer that this data creates a condition of stagnant employment numbers. In fact, you would have to be seriously disturbed to think that increases are stagnant. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Leiter.
Thank you, Mr. President. After all of that, what I heard being so
Senator
disturbing,
Leiter, question.
Mr. President, however, the facts are the facts, and given that the construction sub-item of the Ministry of Works and Transport's draft estimates for 2024 is more than $2 million lower than what was allotted in 23 to 2022.
What's the question?
The question is through you to the Minister of Works, to the Minister of Finance. Is this an indicator, after all of his boasting, that we will see this employment decline as a result of government reducing their investment in this sector?
So, number one, I didn't get that question, and I'm certain nobody else in here got it. Again, ask the question succinctly, as a question.
Mr. Vice President, I will repeat because there's a context. Given that the construction sub-item in the Ministry of... Okay.
So, have a seat, have a seat. Have a seat. Take your time. We all know what a question is. You don't need to create a long run-up. Keep it succinct. There's a very limited time to get through the process of oral questions. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. President. Given that this government has reduced its expenditure in the construction sector through the Ministry of Works and Transport, is this an indicator that after all the boasting today, that we will see a decline in the construction sector in the year 2023-2024? No, you reduce your investment.
Senator Leiter, let me respond. I will not allow that question. Next supplemental.
Mr. President, given that the roadmap to recovery and the subsequent previous budget presentations, that the construction sector would have been termed as the enabling sector to aid us against the losses of the pandemic and the drop in the energy sector, mainly via increased public spending. Does this decline in expenditure by this government indicate that the government has now abandoned the plans to use construction as an enabling sector?
So again, question does not arise. Next supplemental. Senator Leiter.
Question number 29 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Public Transport Service Corporation is evaluating tenders for the procurement and operationalization of 300 new buses comprising 240 electric, 30 CNG, and 30 diesel-powered buses. In addition, the tenders include the acquisition of an intelligent public transportation solution system for the 300 buses, which will enable PTSE to provide a more efficient service to the public. The PTSE has also taken steps to improve the daily availability of buses, which includes the successful implementation of a fleet maintenance and management report system, improvement of the preventative maintenance of buses, implementation of systems to respond to breakdowns, streamlining procurement of spare parts and planned maintenance, implementation of measures to reduce the repair time. Further, the corporation has operationalized 5 new buses serving the rural communities in Mamoral, Erin, St. Helena, Toko, and Blanchisseuse. There's also planned development and operationalization of transportation hubs, depot, and passenger facilities, terminals in Siparia, Rio Claro, Chaguanas, Taruba, and Tobago to provide more communities with improved access to PTSC services. I thank you.
Mr. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, through you, can the Honourable Minister indicate to this Senate when do we expect the completion of the bids, the completion of the process, and buses to be landed in service in Trinidad and Tobago to take care of this big shortfall?
Minister.
Mr. President, we recognize that we have passed the procurement legislation, and this government respects the process of the procurement of the buses. The process is ongoing. It's at the evaluation stage. The minister will not get involved in that. And at the shortest possible time, when a contractor or a preferred bidder have been identified, then the minister will then take it forward to ensure that the buses reach here at the shortest possible time. Thank you.
Senator Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And through you, Mr. President, to the Honourable Minister of Works and Transport, can the Minister tell this Senate, given his previous response indicating no knowledge when it will be completed, has the government studied the negative impact to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and put in place anything to resolve this negative impact? Because we are speaking about a significant shortfall in the amount of bus service.
Mr. President, a shortfall in buses is nothing new. The purchase of buses have always been an ongoing process. We have just completed the purchase of the last 100 buses, where we had the last 5 coming in. The step going forward to bring in 300 buses is because the government have identified the amount of buses needed in the fleet. And for the first time, we are taking this bold move at PTSC to have adequate buses for the amount of routes, and just not for the routes that are serviced now, but to also ensure that the PTSC is the #1 mode of public transportation. We have identified that we cannot bill ourselves out of traffic jam, and we have to look at mass transportation, and we are working with PTSC, and that is why I read out all the steps being taken to ensure that the PTSC comes up to the sort of standard and reliability that is required for proper public transportation service. We have engaged several other methods of transportation. We have just approved a checkered band maxi system for the first time in Trinidad to work in rural areas, because we are looking at the National Transportation Plan as a holistic approach, where we are looking at both land, sea, and air to ensure that transportation and mobility in Trinidad and Tobago is of a world-class standard. Thank you.
Senator Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to the Minister of Works and Transport, can the Minister tell this House, after 8 years of the PNM being in power, has this government decided to alter the system of projections in terms of ordering buses so that we don't end up in this major shortfall again? There are 8 years here now, Mr. President.
Minister.
Mr. President, the senator keeps talking about 8 years, and because it's Diwali, I wouldn't want to spoil the mood. But I can tell you, spoil it? What is strange is that in my first year of office as minister, I found a report that was commissioned by the former Minister of Transport under the then UNC government that said that some of the PTSC buses, as much as they were short, some of them were being used as hotels. So to come and say today that the government, after 8 years...
Have a seat, Minister. Have a seat, Minister. Senator Leader. Senator Leader, #1, do not let that happen again by way of an outburst when a minister is responding to a question. Allow the minister to answer the question. Minister.
Mr. President, This government didn't take 8 years. As minister, I have delivered 100 buses over the last 8 years. 100. And I intend to deliver another 300 before I demit office. But none of these buses will be used as hotels. I give you that assurance. Thank you.
Senator Leiter.
All right, question number 30. Question number 30 to the Honourable Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Mr. President, following the fire on the boat, the MV Cabo Star, the owners of the vessel arranged for an interim vessel to transport cargo to and from Tobago at a reduced cost to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Although it had a smaller capacity than the MV Cabo Star, the MF Emperador, which is registered in neighboring Venezuela, was available at short notice and was put into service in Trinidad and Tobago with effect from September 12, 2023. In the absence of the MV Cabo Star and while arrangements were being made for the interim replacement of a cargo vessel, the Galleon Passage was assigned to carry cargo between the islands. Additional sailings were also scheduled on the APT James and the Boko Reef to assist with transporting essential cargo. At all times, in the event of an unforeseen malfunction of any vessel on the inter-island service, to minimize the disruption of movement of goods, additional sailings of the available fleet are utilized to compensate for any shortfall. Further, it should be noted that the vessels operating on the inter-island service must comply with the respective statutory maintenance program and dry docking schedule to ensure they operate safely and maintain class certification. Accordingly, whenever a more extended period of absence is required to complete major maintenance or dry docking work, replacement vessels are chartered if necessary. I thank you.
Senator Leiter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the Honourable Minister indicate the cost of the repair works done on the MV Cabo Star subsequent to this incident?
Minister.
Mr. President, again, if the member does his homework or understand what is happening, this vessel is a chartered vessel, and any expenditure to repairs is borne by the charterers or the owners of the vessel. The government has no expenditure in the repairs of a chartered vessel. Thank you.
Senator Leiter.
To the Minister, given that the use of the MV Emperador was unsuccessful in mitigating the losses of the Cabo Star shutdown, is the government putting anything in place for future and similar incidents on board the APT James, Boko Reef, or the Cabo Star in an effort to mitigate against further losses, especially to the business community of Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
Mr. President, again, I don't know where the information is coming from. However, I met with the Tobago Business Chamber. I met with the Tobago Business Chamber with a delegation from the Port Authority and the Ministry, and they clearly indicated to us, while there were minimal inconvenience, they were quite satisfied with the effort made by the port. That was carried in the national newspapers of Trinidad and Tobago. And going forward, that is why the government has the foresight where we have 4 vessels for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. And all these vessels are capable of transporting cargo. So in the event of an unforeseen circumstance, we have several other, we have the APT James, the Boko Reef, the Spirit, the Galleon Passage, and we also have the Cabo Star. 5 vessels for the first time in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have thousands of extra capacity seats available and also cargo space. Yes. So I don't know if the member wants some more information. I'm quite prepared to share it with him so you would not put misinformation in the public domain. Thank you.
Senator Leiter.
Some more information. In fact, can the Minister indicate here or now in writing the total cost of leasing the NV Emperador? Is that how it's called? Emperador.
Minister.
Mr. President,
Senator Leiter, allow him to answer the question.
I indicated at the start that the vessel was leased by the owners of the Cabo Star at a reduced price because it was less capacity. I indicated that at the start. All right? So the vessel was not leased by the state. Thank you.
Senator Lyda, any more supplementals?
Yeah. No, that's it, Mr. President. Yeah.
Senator Dr. Paul Richards.
Mr. President, good afternoon, colleagues. Question number 42 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. President. According to information received from the Commissioner of Police, since the commencement of the Act, there have been 517 applications for pepper spray licenses as at the 12th of October 2023, and they are as follows. Importers applications, 110. Retailer or distributor applications, 23. And individual user applications, 384. Since the commencement of the Act, the number of licenses granted and disaggregated is as follows. For the importers, 8 have been distributed, 6 male, 2 female. As for retailers, 3 male, 1 female, and as for users, 15 male, 23 female. Mr. President, the average duration for the approval or denial of a pepper spray permit application, considering the varying categories, are as follows. For importers' licenses, 8 weeks, retailers, 8 weeks, and for the users, 4 weeks. May I thank you.
Senator Dr. Richards.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the Honourable Minister. Thank you for the information. Could the Minister clarify, the Minister indicated 384 users' applications and 15 male and 23 female. Is that those who were granted, Minister?
Minister.
I indicated the number of licenses granted were as I have described them.
Senator.
Thank you. Can the Minister indicate, given the novelty of this legislation, if the regulations, if the monitoring of the quality, type, and specific approved types of pepper spray imported into the country are being monitored and regulated effectively?
Minister.
I would think so, since I am confident that the Commissioner of Police, in administering this law, would do so in accordance with the laws and the regulations that surround them.
Senator.
Thank you. Final question on this supplemental. Can the Minister indicate if the Commissioner of Police and her team are also monitoring illegal importation of the pepper sprays into the country to protect the public interest?
Minister.
Again, Mr. President, I would anticipate, I would expect that to be the case, since it is the business of the police to prevent crimes and other infractions of the laws.
Senator Dr. Paul Richards.
Thank you. Question number 46 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you yet again, Mr. President. Again, according to information received from the Commissioner of Police, the average numbers of functional police vehicles as per police division for the period September 2022 to September 2023 are as follows. In the Central Division, 50 vehicles. Northern Division North, since Northern Division was relatively recently divided into 2, North Central and North. Northern Division North, 38. North Central Division, 32. Eastern Division, 28. Northeastern Division, 17. Port of Spain Division, 17. Southern Division, 37. Southwestern Division, 21. Tobago Division, 84, Western Division 25. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, Mr. President, would the Minister have a total number of active functional vehicles, given the disaggregation he's provided?
I saw the Senator was calculating as I went along, but for his convenience, the figure is 349.
Senator.
Thank you. Can the Minister indicate, given the numerous reports by members of the public of poor response times by the police service when reports of crimes are sent to police stations, in addition to sometimes police precincts indicating they have no vehicle, if he's satisfied with this number of vehicles, functional vehicles, available to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service?
Minister.
All things considered, I would never be satisfied until there's absolutely no such complaint. In the circumstances, as we speak, the government is in the process of, as we have been doing regularly in the recent past, we are in the process of acquiring replacement vehicles for those that are dysfunctional from the police service, the defense force, the prison service as well. So yes, it's an ongoing business, Mr. President, and we are constantly working to upgrading our fleet, improving the numbers so that the police will have the resources to carry out their work as they're expected to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Final supplemental on this question. Can the Minister indicate if, given this response he's just provided, the government seeking to acquire new vehicles for the police service and other arms of national security, if he is satisfied that effective maintenance schedules are in place to ensure that the vehicles that are active are maintained for maximum use?
Minister.
Again, I couldn't truthfully say that I am satisfied. One is always aspiring to do better. There have been instances of misuse, abuse of police vehicles generally. I think it is truthful and safe to say that our record as a nation in respect of the maintenance of our assets might not have always been where they ought to be. But on each occasion from here on out, we take action as a government to ensure that as we acquire new assets, whether they are marine assets or vehicles, we put systems in place for upgraded and improved maintenance. Thank you very much.
Senator Dr. Paul Richards.
Thank you. Question number 47 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Yet again, I'm in the spirit of gratitude for an opportunity to respond to the question of the learned senator. According to information received from the Commissioner of Police, for the period September 2022 to 2023, there were 663 murders, while the percentage of suspects or persons arrested and charged for murders was 16%.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is the Minister satisfied, given the primary issue facing the country, with that level of detection rate and arrests?
Minister.
Absolutely not. It is the reason why this minister, with the support of the cabinet and the government, we have spent a lot of time and resources improving our scientific response to crime, our scientific approaches to solving crime. We have taken action, we have improved affairs at the Forensic Science Center in every department, in the biology section, in the DNA section, in the ballistic section. We have been improving the resources, and the police, the end users, have been constantly reporting. We have strengthened CERU, which is the police's scientific unit, looking at evidence, recovery. They are consistently indicating that the systems that they work are improving and they're getting better and better results. But I have observed as Minister of National Security that while that is happening, because they have charged more people this year for murders, I think the last figure I revealed to this Parliament was about 87 people, some for offenses that took place last year as well. They have been improving their technique. I'm confident and can truthfully say that. However, the rate of killings in this country, with the advent of all of these automatic weapons using military-grade ammunition, is really putting stresses on the system. Hence the reason why we are as well taking action to improve our border security, to improve our border management with marine assets, with training, with setting up AirCop and CCOP and other such actions to deal with this threatening situation that is affronting all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. And another approach we take is the legislative approach. So from time to time, we'll come to this House with measures seeking the support of my friends on the other side to toughen our response as a nation to those who are perpetrating criminal acts against us. And in that regard, I look forward to support from my friends on the other side. I thank you.
Senator.
Thank you. Final question. Can the minister indicate, that for the time period identified, September 2022 to September 2023, there were 663 murders reported, and 14% of those attracted charges. Can the minister... 16%, sorry, I apologize. And because we know that some suspects may kill more than one person, can the minister disaggregate and let us know how many charges were laid to specific persons related to those 663 murders?
Minister.
A very sensible and analytical question, but unfortunately I should be unable to say so at this time. If given an opportunity, I should respond in writing or at a later stage to the specific question from the learned senator. I thank you.
Senator.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it in writing. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. President.
Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate and moved by our minister.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, with regard to the correspondence from the Speaker of the House dated 4th November 2023 in relation to the establishment of a joint select committee to consider and report on the Representation of the People Amendment Bill 2020, I beg to move that the Senate concur with the House of Representatives in the establishment of the committee, and that the following 6 senators be appointed to serve. 1, Dr. Amory Brown. 2, Ms. Paula Gopi-Schoon. 3, Mr. Randall Mitchell. 4, Mr. Wade Mark. 5, Dr. Maria Dillon Remy. And 6, Mr. Deorup Timal.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate concur with the House of Representatives in the establishment of a joint select committee to consider and report on the Representation of the People Amendment Bill 2020, and that the following 6 senators be appointed to serve on this committee: Dr. Amory Brown, Ms. Paula Gopi-Schoon, Mr. Randall Mitchell, Mr. Wade Mark, Dr. Maria Dillon Remy, and Mr. Deorup Timal. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Senator Lachmidial.
Mr. President, in accordance with Standing Order 39-2, I beg to move the following motion standing in the name of Senator Wade Mark. Whereas, by virtue of Section 7(6)(e) of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act 2015, the Minister of Finance may, upon his initiative, with the agreement of the Office of the Procurement Regulator, subject to the negative resolution of Parliament, by order, determine that the Act shall not apply to services provided to public bodies or state-controlled enterprises. And whereas, by the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023, published on 8th May 2023 by Legal Notice 270 dated 7th September 2023, provided at Clause 3 of the said order that the Act does not apply to the procurement of financing services by the Ministry with responsibility for finance for central government or a public body where the financing services are to be guaranteed by the government. And whereas the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 is contrary to the principles of good governance, namely accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money, be it resolved that the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 be annulled. Mr. President, I wish to begin my presentation on this motion by thanking Senator Mark firstly for filing this very timely motion. It is in keeping, of course, with the mandate and of the opposition United National Congress as we continue to be vigilant and discharge our duty to the people of Trinidad and Tobago by holding the government to account, by utilizing the Parliament as a forum to ventilate issues which affect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this includes an examination of all actions taken by the government and the opportunity for this House, the Senate, and in the other place to debate orders which are passed and which are subject to the negative resolution of Parliament. This Senate today has the opportunity to undo an action taken by the government, by the Minister of Finance on behalf of the government, which we believe is not in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And so we have utilized the procedures of this Parliament to give the Senate that opportunity. And I call upon all members of the Senate to carefully consider what this order that has been passed by the Minister of Finance, what it will introduce, how it will impact upon individuals, businesses, corporate entities, and the public as a whole, and to determine, when they listen to the information presented here today, whether it is in the best interest of us as a country to exempt certain services from the oversight of the procurement regulator and to completely exempt those services from the provisions of the Procurement Act. I think in order for us to have a healthy and informative debate, it is necessary for a little bit of context and for us to also look at a little bit of history as it surrounds public procurement and this piece of legislation, which continues to be whittled away by this government, Mr. President. It is the People's Partnership Government that enacted the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015. It was not something that was done overnight. In fact, it was in response to decades of representation from all different sectors within this country, whether it be from construction, whether it came out of various commissions of inquiry. And we have been here at least on 2 occasions that I could recall to debate procurement issues. It comes up in almost every discussion that we have and every debate that we have at budget time. And so we are all familiar with the history and the calls being made for a better system of procurement. The sitting government, now when they were in opposition and even when they were coming into government, lamented the fact that what we had passing as a procurement system in this country under the Central Tenders Board Act was inefficient. It did not permit sufficient oversight. It was outdated. The procedures did not work for us. We needed change. And more than that, the issue of corruption and a lack of transparency and accountability plagued public procurement for decades. It is under the leadership of Kamla Persad-Bissessar and the People's Partnership Government that we sought to treat with that problem by bringing this piece of legislation. I feel it is necessary to remind the public that when this government sat in opposition and Mrs. Persad-Bissessar and her government took the very brave and bold step to pass this law, that the People's National Movement, then in opposition, not only walked out of the Joint Select Committee that was appointed to treat with the bill, they walked out of it. They did not participate in the Joint Select Committee that dealt with the bill. And then they did not vote to support it. So their history and their approach to public procurement is evident from as early as 2015. They did not, in fact, they abstained from voting on this very good piece of legislation that was introduced by the United National, by the People's Partnership, led by the UNC, led by Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, and they did not seem to be interested. And that particular perception that began in 2015 that you could have of this particular government, they have cemented that perception by their actions. Because what did they do since they entered into office? And let us look at the history of amendments. In 2016, they brought amendments to insert a review board to be appointed by the president on the advice, I think after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Minister of the Opposition, as an added layer where someone must then go before the review board to question the decision taken by the regulator before they proceed to the court. So they've made the proceedings, in our view, a little more lengthy and so on. In 2017, they came with another set of amendments to shorten the time for the Office of the Procurement Regulator as well as members of the board. It didn't seem that they wanted a procurement regulator to be there for 7 years. They thought that 5 years was sufficient, and then they can change who the procurement regulator needed to be. Again, those time frames weren't picked out of and plucked out of the air when the original bill was passed. It was done after extensive consultation with stakeholders, the private sector, and the persons who had been clamoring for this particular piece of legislation to be enacted for decades. But when this government came into office, they made changes, and we could only speculate as to who they consulted with, because I have gone back and I have looked through the records and I've tried to find whatever justification they may have for these changes, and I have been unable to find any of substance. In 2020, the most dastardly act of decimation against the public procurement regime. And all of this time, Mr. President, I don't think I need to remind you, but I will remind the public that all of this time, year after year after year, from when they assumed office, from when the government assumed office in 2015, every budget presentation, every time the question was posed by members of industry and persons who belong to the chambers of commerce, they would say that they are working, towards that the public procurement law would be rolled out this year. This would be done, that would be done. The regulations, it was reported, had been submitted for, an extended period of time to the minister. It had not been dealt with. And today, some 8 years later, we still do not have a fully functional system for public procurement under this piece of legislation. What we do have are amendments being brought. So in 2020, 5 years after coming into office, having not proclaimed and not implemented the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, the government sought to bring exemptions, and they sought to exempt a series of services, including legal services, medical services, and they included in that original bill financing services, but it was then amended to say debt financing services for the national budget, as well as accounting and auditing services. And I will revert to the speaking about the debate on that particular bill in a short period of time. Mr. President, it is passing strange that when they were in opposition, and I found the debate in the Hansard when the Honorable Prime Minister, a then leader of the opposition, spoke on the 5th of December 2015, saying that, in relation to the passage of that particular bill by the People's Partnership Administration. He says, even now as they pass it, as they will, ask them when they intend to proclaim it. And if they can tell us that now, I will be educated. Mr. President, I beg to be educated from this government now. When do you intend to stop trimming, cutting, exempting things out of this piece of legislation and bringing it into effect? Because in 2015, you seem very hot, sweaty, and, perturbed, very perturbed about the implementation of this law when you sat in opposition. And no less a person than the Honorable Prime Minister at the time, as leader of the opposition, kept raising this concern. So we continue to raise these concerns. But as we representing the people who are of Trinidad and Tobago, and several other entities out there representing the interests of various stakeholder groups continue to ask, when will we have a functional procurement agency and a functional system of public procurement in this country that will work in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? We have asked it year after year, time after time, and up to now we cannot get a proper, substantial answer that actually materializes from this government. And that, Mr. President, is a travesty. But to add insult to injury, what they continue to do is to remove services from the oversight of the procurement regulator. So earlier this year, we came after, again, being caught red-handed, hand in the cookie jar, having not utilized and having broken the law in relation to public procurement and procuring services for a CARICOM crime summit at the Hyatt for the symposium. Again, thanks to the vigilance of the opposition, they were called out. Right. I heard the Honorable Prime Minister refer to, well, how did he refer to MP? The MP for Barataria Sawa, the little one from Sawa. Well, I want to tell him, that bright boy from Sawa, that bright boy from Sawa had them coming here and begging this Senate to validate their illegality earlier this year. And now they have removed certain things that relate to conferences and seminars and so on where foreign heads of government will attend. And they brought another order earlier this year exempting a series of services to be provided to the judiciary. The only way I can describe the justification given to this parliament during that debate, because I went back and I looked at it again, I looked at it on YouTube, and I'm very grateful that we have these things now recorded so I don't have to read it, or I can listen to it in the car or wherever I want to listen to it. But I listened to it and it is wishy-washy. That is the only word I could come up with, is wishy-washy justification for the removal of these things from the oversight of the procurement regulator. It is really totally and completely, lacking in any substance why it is we cannot have a procurement regulator having oversight over these issues. So then that brings us now to the present day. And what we have is that the minister has brought another order.
It's a point of order.
46.1. This motion deals with a specific order dealing with specific things.
Okay, so point of order raises one on relevance. And as much as you are the mover of the motion today, and that context has been created, you are, based on what I've heard, getting to the order that's before us. For other members that may wish to join, the issue that is before the Senate right now is very, very specific. So as you intend to join the debate, there is a boundary and a line that is very tight as it relates to this. So, Senator, continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I said, context and history is important so we can have a meaningful debate, because the order before us today is now seeking to exempt further services. So we have a history of things being removed by way of amendments, and now we have, for the second time in a very short space of time, certain activities and services being removed by way of order, put into effect on the 7th day of September 2023, subject to the negative resolution of Parliament. The opposition always, and when the 2020 amendments were brought, we argue against the negative resolution because, and again, for the knowledge of the public and perhaps others who may be even in here, when something comes into effect and it can be utilized before this debate takes place and before we have an opportunity to bring the motion, it's there and it's in effect once it's signed by the minister. And when you are taking drastic measures, like removing something as broad and as wide as financing services from oversight of the procurement regulator, these things ought not to be done by way of negative resolution. So I want to make the point again that the opposition continues to make, that parliamentary approval before drastic measures like this take effect ought to be the order of the day and not the manner in which we are going about it now. Because since the 7th of September, this order has been in effect, and we are today in November. Right, almost 2 months. And, Mr. President, why it is necessary for us, again, to look at what we are exempting this financing services from. What does the Public Procurement Act provide for? It provides for state enterprises to essentially be able to publish or mandates that they, as long as it's available, publish information for upcoming procurement that may be done in short order after the budget, because that is when it is expected that state enterprises and agencies of government and so on will know what they intend to buy and what they intend to procure. It provides for even the promotion of local industry development by way of limiting the persons who can participate. It provides for due diligence. It provides for challenge proceedings. You can disqualify people for certain reasons. When you exempt a particular category of services from all of this, you deprive the people of Trinidad and Tobago of what is provided for in this act. And what is provided for in this act, Mr. President, I could find, again, because I went back to look at the debate when it was the original piece of law was being passed, and I could find no better way to describe what this act will do and what we are now depriving the country of as it relates to financing services. But I found that the words of the then Honorable Prime Minister and opposition, now opposition leader, what she had to say about the bill, and I am quoting from the Hansard on the 5th of December 2015. It is a very simple, clear, very focused bill to build integrity into public procurement. It seeks to promote...
Point of order. This is simply to add government-guaranteed financing to an exemption that already exists for financing for the national budget. That is all this is.
So I'm assuming there's a point of order in there, right? So again, Senator, you've created the context. You've gotten to what is before us. This is not allowed in terms of rehashing the debate as it relates to the passage of the Public Procurement Act. We're not going back into that, and there's no need to actually quote from the Hansard in relation to that. What we have before us is extremely, extremely tight and specific. So you've started down that road of speaking to it, and I would ask you to continue.
Yes. Mr. President, if we are to understand what we are exempting, we must understand what the Public Procurement Bill is about. Exactly. So we have to understand what public procurement is about. The Act itself states what it's about, and we are now removing a classification of services out of the oversight for this particular piece of law. So I think it is extremely important. Well, let us go a little more into context. Mr. President, when we are dealing with financing services, and the Minister is right, the 2020 amendment eventually said debt financing services for the national budget. But, Mr. President, I want to remind this Honourable Senate and members who may have been here and some who are new, that when the 2020 amendment was first presented in this House, it said that the Act will not apply to legal services, and it said the same thing, financial services, very, very broad, financial services. And it was because of the very vociferous arguments put forward by members of this House and the very stringent and very pertinent concerns raised by both the opposition and independent bench that amendment was made. And what we have here now is an order being signed in September 23, surreptitiously introducing back into the public procurement legislation the exact thing that this Senate did not want in 2020. The exact thing. And so I know they don't want to hear about the history and the context, because they perhaps do not want us to highlight the fact that what we actually argued against in 2020, what we forced them to amend in 2020, it is back again, and it has come through the back door by way of an order. It has been in effect since September, and we are here today to argue against it, because it is... So I know every time I talk about history, I will hear someone opposite jump up on a standing order, because they don't want to be reminded that they tried a shot before. They come back with the same shot again. And at that point in time, when financing services sought to be exempted, and the minister had been winding up on the debate on that bill, he said, we will change financing services to debt financing services for the national budget. So it becomes crystal clear, it is not any ordinary common or garden financial service. It is financing specifically for the national budget. That was the undertaking given by the minister. Then the amendment was moved on the floor during the committee stage, and the amendment was made to the 2020 bill that was brought here, and we had that introduced here, Mr. President. Although the opposition voted against it, it was supported and it became part of our law. So I want to know if it is that today we are having a reintroduction of what this Senate voted against in 2020, what we argued against, what we didn't want, and who is going to stand up against it, because that is the question, and that is the million-dollar question. Well, it might be a multi-million-dollar question when we start looking at what is taking place right now in the country. Mr. President, the order itself has very wide terms. The Act does not apply to the procurement of financing services by the Ministry responsible for finance. What is financing services? How do you define financing services? Is it any transaction required to obtain a financial good? That could mean any number of services that the government wishes to procure in the issuance of bonds and the raising of capital on international markets, local. There are so many different things that financing services can encompass. And in this one piece of paper with just about, I don't know, maybe 20 lines in total, 3/4 of which are, procedural things, you have a whole host of perhaps billions of dollars worth of services now being removed from the oversight of the procurement regulator. And that, Mr. President, to me, is something that ought not to be done by order. It ought not to be coming to this Parliament for negative resolution. But again, due to the thankfully, you have a vigilant opposition that brings these things to the public domain, so the public understands, because I don't know who reads the Gazette, but if the opposition wasn't reading the Gazette and we did not file this motion, I don't think that anybody in this country, including the media, because today is the first day us having filed this motion that I've seen something in the media about this exemption. And it is extremely important that people of this country understand how the dollar value of what is now being exempted and removed from oversight of the public procurement regulator. Mr. Vice President, we are in a situation where net public sector debt to GDP, according to the central bank, and I'm quoting now from their website, they have public sector debt outstanding and so on, and that is why it is important for us to, and I'm making it relevant to the order before us, when you are exempting financing services, it is because the government will now be able to raise finance and so on, central government as well as public bodies. So let's deal with central government, because that's what these statistics deal with. And when we look at the amount of debt we have in this country...
Mr. President, seriously, Standing Order 46.1, this is not relevant to the motion.
Of course it's relevant.
This is not relevant.
So, all right. So, Senator, I hear what you're trying to say. Just, again, be extremely careful, because dealing with the context that you're creating right now has a specific debate for that in terms of the debt to GDP ratio and raising the debt ceiling and all of that. If you're tying it in, it needs to be pretty clear as to how it specifically ties to this.
Let me make it abundantly clear, Mr. President, for those who don't understand, because I think it is important for the public to understand. We are in a situation where the raising of finance by the government, the incurring of debt by the government on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago in relation to our GDP continues to go up. When they took office, it was 44.1% according to the central bank. We are now at somewhere...
So you're starting off and the connection is thin to begin with. You don't need to go in to the depths of explaining how that works. What we're looking for, what I am looking for specifically, is how what is being dealt with in front of us ties to the argument that you're trying to make. So don't go too deeply into how we raise the debt ceiling and all of that. That has a particular process to deal with. What we're dealing with here is an annulment of an order that's been put out and tied exactly to what you're saying.
Yes. Yes, Mr. President. And the tie-in and the relevance of it is that as the government continues to incur debt on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is important that we have oversight. It is important that we get value for money. It is important that there is transparency and accountability. And this order essentially removes and, takes out of the oversight of the Office of the Procurement Regulator all of the principles of good procurement which are included in this piece of legislation. I want to remind the population of what Section 5 has to say about the objectives of this act. So when you remove an entire broad category of services from this act in the context of rising public debt that my great-grandchildren will still be paying off this debt, it is important for us to understand how much our public debt to GDP has increased since this government took office, because they are removing the...
That's what I'm talking about. So there's no need to go down or into that kind of debt as it relates to speaking to the debt to GDP ratio. The argument that you just made prior to that line connects to what's before us. But anytime you go a little deeper into that, that is what is taking you outside of the boundaries of relevance. So you've actually made the point that you were making. And if you have another one, I invite you to move on to that.
Mr. President, I'll move on to what the other provisions are of the order before us. The second part of this provision now exempts public bodies. And again, it is important for us to understand, and this is a part of this debate that we must pay attention to about how wide these definitions are. Public bodies, as defined in the Act, are extremely wide. So any public body where financing services are being guaranteed by the government will now not be subject to all of the provisions of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. So again, and because it is important, to just say that it is removed from the Act is insufficient. It is insufficient. I know the government does not want to hear it, but you are removing the ability of someone to institute challenge proceedings. You are removing the ability of the Office of the Procurement Regulator of their own volition or in relation to a complaint to launch an investigation for a breach of the Act. So for any public body, which starts from the Office of the President, the Judiciary, coming down RHAs, all of the statutory authorities, all of the state enterprises, down the line, if they are raising finance and incurring debt, and there is a government guarantee, they are no longer going to be subject to the requirements under the Public Procurement and Public Disposal of Public Property Act. And that, Mr. President, is something that we say it is unwarranted, it is unjustifiable, and it is totally unnecessary. It is totally unnecessary in light of the fact that there are regulations which provide for instances where you may be able to avoid, for example, some of the rigors of public procurement. And Mr. President, time does not permit me to do an entire review of laws around the world. But at the end of the day, we understand that there would be emergency situations, there would be certain things where you need specific things to be procured, and the regulations that were debated here and passed by this parliament, that were laid and passed in the parliament, make provisions for those things. So why bring this very, very wide exemption? We are in a position right now where there are state enterprises and statutory authorities where the debt that they have incurred and the debt that they are carrying is enormous. There are enormous amounts of debt being carried by, I could tell you, WASA, TNTech, Caribbean Airlines. All of these state enterprises would now be in a position to continue if they are getting, and what does a government guarantee means? It means that they can borrow, and the government is basically issuing whatever you call a letter of comfort or whatever to the commercial bank to say that the government, the taxpayer of this country, will ensure that the debt is repaid. So we as a people are being told the law that provides for transparency, accountability, to ensure that you get value for money, to ensure that loans that are obtained by the state enterprises and so on, everything is done above board. They can, that an independent authority can go in and ask questions, can go in and examine the records and so on. We're taking away all of that, but we're going to guarantee the debt that you have to pay. So that is what the government has come here today to tell the population. You will have to guarantee the debt, but you are not entitled to the protection that this good piece of law has afforded you. That is what they have come here to say. So at the end of the day, yes, state enterprises performing public functions will need to borrow. But you want to ensure that those borrowings are done in a way that it is, it is efficient, and it is transparent. You want to ensure that these are proper decisions being made. We also want to ensure that when government guarantees are being issued, that it is being done, that somebody can go in and investigate. You see, Mr. President, we have a situation here now where you have $100 million projects being undertaken by state enterprises. And at the end of the day, they cannot even fill execute these projects properly because houses are falling down. We recently heard about that. I am asking the government today, was a government guarantee given in relation to financing when you have these design build finance contracts supported by the HDC? Because we know now that there are certain projects being undertaken by the HDC.
Sir, President, Standing Order 46.1. This is not relevant to the motion.
Nothing relevant.
Yeah, so again, Senator, that very final part of the argument just stated is going a bit too far. The earlier part of it connected, but now you're going a little bit too far with it. Continue.
Mr. President, if it is that the people of this country are being told that millions of dollars of work is being undertaken by state enterprises, if it is that they are being told that that utilities, for example, are being increased because of the amount of debt being carried by agencies and so on, don't we have a right to have independent oversight over the borrowings by these enterprises?
Point of order. 46.1. This is not about the items that are being procured. This is about the financing arrangements. It has nothing to do with the works, goods, or services that are procured. 46.1.
So there are two things at play here, Senator. One is the relevance of the matter, and two, because things are so restrictive in relation to this order that is before us, you can indeed and in fact run into tedious repetition very quickly. It's literally one clause that you're arguing and have to make an argument on. You are the mover of the motion, so you have a little bit more leeway than others would, but like I indicated, make your point and just be mindful, one, of tedious repetition and the boundaries of the debate that's before us. Continue.
Mr. President, if we are debating an exemption as it relates to public bodies which are getting government guarantees, isn't it important to examine what public bodies are doing? What are they doing, and why are we giving them government guarantees, and what are these government guarantees that the taxpayer must pay?
In the context of what is before us, and I understand the argument that you're trying to make, problem is that the order before us seeks to annul an exemption order for a very specific thing within a very specific ministry. So you've made that argument twice before in relation to the moving of this motion, where it connected in terms of why you were saying the argument that you're making. That is why I'm saying you're going to run into tedious repetition now, because you're essentially making the same argument over and over again, but trying to go deeper by speaking about specific institutions, what they're purchasing, which does not apply here. So relevance comes into play, and then tedious repetition after that. Continue.
Mr. President, I'm not arguing with your ruling, obviously, but I just wish to say the relevance of what various agencies are doing is the fact that they will now be able to do it without any oversight from a procurement regulator. They will
Point
now
of
be
order,
able to
Mr.
rack
President.
up.
46.1, we are talking about government guaranteed financing, the terms and conditions, the institutions that provide the funding, the procurement process with respect to financing. That is all this is all about.
Okay, so let me try one more time. Now, Minister of Finance, there's no need to go into a longer explanation. I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to respond in full to anything said by the mover of the motion. As to the Senator Gopi Singh, I'm speaking. As to the point of order raised, which is 46.1, Senator, this is about the Ministry of Finance and an exemption as it relates to a process that the Ministry of Finance would engage in. You get why it's tight? Yes. Continue.
See, Mr. President, if the ministry with responsibility for finance wants to procure financing services, and in particular, why does the Ministry of Finance not wish to be subject to oversight by the procurement regulator? That is the question here today. Is it because between 2015 and 2022, on about 16 different occasions, one particular non-bank financial institution closely linked to our government minister was selected in order to do certain things in this country?
Have a seat, Senator. Have a seat. Now 46.6 comes into play. So what is happening is that several standing orders are being traversed as we are trying to move a motion here today to annul this order. Senator, be extremely careful. There isn't much wiggle room at all. And this is a warning to all senators who wish to enter this debate subsequent to the motion being moved. Senator, be very, very careful.
Guided, Mr. President. But, I'm saying, the reason why all of this is important is that because if the Ministry of Finance is then going to procure financing services on behalf of either central government or any public body and give government guarantees, and that the use of particular institutions, financial institutions, which is in the public domain, are closely linked to members of the cabinet who recuse themselves, and rightly so, then it is important to have oversight by the Office of the Procurement Regulator.
Have a seat. So, member, I'm finding it very difficult because this is the movement of a motion that is integral for this whole process to take place today. You cannot impute improper motives. I would invite you now, because I said it's tight, to begin to wrap up.
Very well, Mr. President, I will wrap up. I will make the point that it is important for us to annul this order because at the end of the day, it is absolutely unjustifiable for a ministry to be given free rein to avoid the level of transparency, accountability, and oversight of the procurement regulator in the procurement of financing services. And it is even more so when it relates not just to the budget as was introduced and argued for in 2020 in the Senate and was changed in the law, but to now come and make it as wide as all financing services, not just in relation to central government and the budget, but in relation to other public bodies where the financing services are being given a government guarantee. Mr. President, the people of this country for decades asked for greater level of oversight. The People's partnership government answered that call.
Correct.
And in the last 8 years, it is an injustice to all those who lobbied for and who took their time, put time, energy, and effort into ensuring that we have greater accountability and oversight. It is an injustice to them. It is a slap in the face to the population. It is a government saying, we don't care what you think, we will do whatever we want, and we will not answer to you, when they continue to whittle away and remove oversight of the procurement regulator as it relates to various types of services. Financing services in particular, how debt is incurred by central government, what the Ministry of Finance will be doing as it relates to financing for central government and state enterprises and all public bodies, Mr. President, is a matter of relevance. It is a matter of grave concern given the context of our debt and the debt of our state enterprises. And people of this country have a right to feel the comfort that they will have independent oversight for those types of organizations. Yes, we can name them all coming down the line. They don't want us to talk about it, but at the end of the day, when your bills come at the end of the month, you know it is because of public debt being racked up, and you want that level of oversight for WASA and TNTEC and CAL and all the other state enterprises, so that you know that when they are obtaining financing services, the Ministry of Finance is subject to oversight by a procurement regulator. It is unfair. The debt does not come out of the pocket of the Minister of Finance. It does not come out of the pocket of the members of the cabinet. It is the taxpayer who is being burdened. It is the taxpayer who doesn't understand and who they don't want to understand, which is why they keep jumping up on standing orders. But it's those taxpayers that we are here to speak on their behalf. And on their behalf, we say today, Mr. President, this order must be annulled. We must annul every order that is brought by this government to remove oversight of the regulator. We will not stand by and allow the government to continuously whittle away and water down a piece of legislation meant to improve the way that we do procurement in this country and the way we spend public monies. That is a travesty, and it is an injustice to the people of this country. We stand against it, Mr. President, and we say that this motion is a very timely one. It is one that we must deal with today here in this Parliament, and we must ensure that we uphold the highest standards of integrity when it comes to the expenditure of taxpayers' money in this country. And that is what we are here to argue for today, and we look forward to the support of members of this Senate. I beg to move.
The motion requires a seconder.
Reserve the right to speak at a later stage.
The motion has been seconded by Senator John. Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is, whereas by virtue of Section 76E of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act 2015, the Act, the Minister of Finance may, upon his initiative, with the agreement of the Office of Procurement Regulation, subject to the negative resolution of Parliament, by order, determine that the Act shall not apply to services provided to public bodies or state-controlled enterprises. And whereas, by the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023, published on the 8th of September 2023 by Legal Notice 270, dated the 7th of September 2023, provided at Clause 3 of the said order that the Act does not apply to the procurement of financing services by the Ministry with responsibility for finance for A, central government, or B, a public body where the financing services are to be guaranteed by the government. And whereas the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 is contrary to the principles of good governance, namely accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money, be it resolved that the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 be annulled. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. me deal with one of the first points made by Senator Lachmidial immediately. One of the first points, yes. Questions asked. When do you intend to stop trimming this legislation? And when will you bring the law into effect? I became confused upon hearing that question because the law is in effect and has been in effect since April the 26th, 2023. So I don't understand the point. Secondly, the senator said if the opposition did not bring this motion, no one would know. I didn't understand that either. Because when an order is subject to negative resolution, it must be laid in Parliament within a prescribed time frame. And it was. So, and when the order is laid in the Parliament, it is on the Parliament's website. It is available for public scrutiny. And I can tell you, our media has a habit of going and looking for all the orders that are laid in the Parliament. So it is nonsensical to say that if the opposition did not bring this motion, no one would know. We have a very educated media and population in this country. I found it reprehensible, Mr. President, that the Honourable Senator would make for another time the false allegation that so many members of the UNC have made that there's a particular financial institution linked to a government minister. Closely linked was the word used. Rubbish. The brother of a government minister works in a financial institution. The operations of that financial institution are not in any way connected to the government minister. It is nonsense in the extreme. The minister has no benefit to get. He has no involvement. He has no role to play. He has no ownership, beneficial or otherwise, with respect to that institution. They know that, but they just want to damage families, because what they do is they attack the relatives of people on this side. I find it most disgusting, Mr. President, and I had to make this statement. They always try to denigrate and destroy families by identifying relatives of the members of the PNM government and attacking those family members unjustifiably. Disgusting. But let me move on, Mr. President. Let me move on. You heard that? That's the kind of nastiness we have to put up with here. Anyway, let's move on, Mr. President. You know, there was a UNC minister by the name of Jack Warner. And whenever you said something to Jack Warner that he didn't like, it was always factual and truthful, but something he didn't like, possibly because it was truthful. He said to the person who was making the statement, "You are engaging in histrionics." That was his pet word. In fact, I read out something the other day that Mr. Warner had said with respect to the Point Fortin Highway, and he accused me of histrionics. So I thought, let me see what is the definition of histrionics. And it is melodramatic behavior designed to... 46 what?
Mr. Jack Warner has to do with this and the histrionics of the Point Fortin Highway. Yeah. He's objecting to us at this side.
Okay.
But here,
Okay, Senator, have a seat. All right, so the point of order of relevance has been raised. The minister is responding to the motion that has been moved by the senator before. Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much. And you know, Mr. President, I apologize profusely. In fact, I called the Speaker the other day, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. Mr. President, we have $7 million in the annual budget this year for adult literacy. And I will encourage all those who need remedial education to avail themselves of that adult literacy program. My contribution at this point in time is about the word histrionics. And I simply said that I heard this word being uttered by a former UNC minister. My presentation was not about him. It was about the word histrionics. So let me go to what histrionics is. Melodramatic behavior designed to attract attention. And that sums it up. That sums up the contribution from the Honorable Senator Lakshmi Dayal. Melodramatic behavior designed to attract attention. Histrionics. Because, let us go to what this matter is all about. And it needs to be explained, because members opposite, as I said before, are experts in gaslighting. Experts in gaslighting. Create an untruth and then promote that untruth in such a manner that people begin to doubt themselves. So, prior to the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023, which is the subject of this motion, only debt financing services for the national budget were exempted under Section 76B of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. Now, debt financing services for the national budget means financing raised by the central budget government for the purpose of deficit financing. And this is when expenditure is higher than revenue, you borrow, and you engage in debt financing. When we brought that amendment bill in 2020, the definition of the exemption that we wished to create at the time was simply financing services. It was felt by honorable senators opposite that we needed to tighten that up. So in the to and fro and the back and forth and the discussion and the compromise and so on in good faith, a proposal was made by one of the independents that let's make it deficit financing for the national budget. We were quite amenable and we agreed, and we amended it from financing services to debt financing for the national budget. That's what happened. However, what was not apparent at the time was that it might not be possible to include in that definition debt financing for the national budget, off-budget financing, such as government-guaranteed debt issued by state enterprises and statutory authorities. Now, government-guaranteed borrowings are loans contracted by these entities, state enterprises and statutory authorities, with a government guarantee for the purpose of funding urgent payments for goods and services and other expenditure for critical needs of the population, such as medical equipment and supplies. Prior to coming in force of the new procurement legislation in April 2023, and I want to repeat, it is in effect. To ask when it will come into effect is really a strange question. All public debt financing included both direct central government and government guarantee. And these debt financing arrangements were managed exclusively by the Debt Management Division of the Ministry of Finance. And the Debt Management Division is mandated by law to report an account to Parliament for the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago's public debt, which includes both central government debt and government guaranteed debt. We in finance are required to report to Parliament on all public debt, which includes this category of debt. And in that way, there is accountability and transparency. However, there's another very important reason why for the last can't give a precise time frame. We're talking at least 50 years, maybe 60 years, that the Debt Management Division of the Ministry of Finance has been responsible for managing central government borrowings and government guaranteed borrowings. There's a very good reason for that, because it is the Ministry of Finance's responsibility to ensure that all metrics, all parameters of our debt portfolio as a country are maintained within internationally acceptable parameters. These would include risk parameters such as exchange rate risk, because one has to look at the currency, whether the loan financing is in US dollars, euros, yen, or in other international currencies, or in Trinidad and Tobago dollars. So we have to look at exchange rate risk, rollover risk, the average time to maturity, the interest cost and free structure. And let me explain what rollover risk is all about. For example, we are now looking at a second issue of NIF, a second 5-year series, and we were contemplating a rollover provision in a 5-year NIF bond issue. And that's by a state enterprise, by the way. That's a government guaranteed borrowing, which the Ministry of Finance will manage. And it came to our attention that if we put a rollover provision, let's say you could, when the 5 years comes to an end, as recently happened with Series A in NIF 1, you can roll over your investment and continue with the same investment at the same interest rate. It came to our attention that was effectively increasing the tenor of the financing, and you would have to increase the interest rate. So there are very complex decisions that have to be made with respect to debt financing, whether it is central government financing or whether it is government guaranteed financing. In addition, Mr. President, the previous arrangement where all debt financing, whether for central government or guaranteed by state enterprises, ensured the management of that by the Ministry of Finance ensured it was done in accordance with the legislative framework, the guidelines, and the debt maturity profile of the entire portfolio, because you have to understand that when the government guarantees debt, for example, when we procure pharmaceuticals, which is what we do all the time, because believe it or not, in this country, we are an outlier. I actually have a team here from the World Bank looking at our social safety net, looking at our free medication system, looking at our public assistance program, looking at disability assistance and so on. And they have already told me we are an outlier. And let me explain what I mean by that. We spend over $1 billion on free pharmaceuticals in this country every single year. $1 billion, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sorry, Mr. President. I'm in too many houses at too many times. So we spend $1 billion a year on pharmaceuticals, and much of it is borrowed money. And you have to look at the maturity profile. For example, when you're doing debt financing, you don't want bunching of debt. And I do wish when I come into this parliament that members opposite on the lower bench do some research, try and understand what we are coming here to discuss. Have a modicum of intellect in your presentations, so that what you want to avoid is bunching of debt. So when you look at the tenor, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, you don't want all your debt bunching in year 5, because you may find that you have an extraordinary debt servicing responsibility. And with government guaranteed debt, it is customary, if one looks at the estimates of expenditure, if one goes through Head 18 and Head 19, Ministry of Finance, you will see that we have made provision for debt servicing for all of this government guaranteed debt. The Ministry of Finance pays it. We in finance, we make available the money to the state enterprises and statutory authorities to pay
government guaranteed debt because we accept it as a responsibility of the central government. And therefore, we have to be very careful with government guaranteed debt that is being done properly, that you're getting best value for money, it is being done at the best rate, that the tenor is appropriate to avoid bunching of debt, that the terms and conditions are appropriate, that the fees being charged by the institutions are appropriate, the fees being charged by the lawyers for preparing the documents, which include the trustee, the paying agency agreement, the subscription agreement. And I would expect a lawyer like Senator Dutch-Medial to be aware of documents such as these. We have to make sure that all the drafting of all of these documents, particularly trust deed, are done properly in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's the Ministry of Finance that has responsibility for all of this, to make sure that the debt is done in accordance with best practice and to make available the debt servicing to the state enterprises and the statutory authorities, and to also make sure that these enterprises don't get us into trouble. And I've said all of this to make it clear that public debt management is a highly specialized area. There is no room for amateurs in this. No room for amateurs. And the Ministry of Finance, over the last several decades, has invested in significant training of its staff and broad-based reform of our debt management division. In fact, we get technical assistance from many of the multilaterals all the time to assist us. We had an IMF team here this year taking a look at our debt management and giving us advice on how to manage our debt. We've had the Commonwealth Secretariat has come in and done a paper giving us advice on how we could best manage our public debt and so on. We do this every year. So we have very specialized staff. They are trained in debt management. They are experts, I dare to say. They are experts. And the knowledge and expertise with respect to public debt management, I dare say, is only resident within the public sector. It is only resident in the debt management division of the Ministry of Finance. It is resident nowhere else. State enterprises do not have the ability, they do not have the resources, I dare say they don't have the funding to procure this level of specialized expertise in debt management. And why would you want them to have that bureaucracy anyway? Why would you want that? And the same applies to the procurement, Office of Procurement Regulator. Why should they go through the process of hiring and training specialized debt management personnel? We account to the Parliament. Anybody could ask any question here. We account to the Parliament on this, not just in the documents that we lay, but we are available to respond to queries on public debt. Now, Mr. President, when we recognize that the amendment that was made in good faith would exclude government guaranteed financing, we decided that we had to make the adjustment. And in accordance with the amendment made in this place and the other place to the public procurement laws, where the authority and power was taken away from the Minister of Finance to adjust and amend regulations and given to the regulator, because we have to do it with the consent of the regulator, the approval. So the first thing we had to do is go and make our case on this matter to the procurement regulator. And if the procurement regulator had not agreed that we could make this order, we'd have never made it. And I can assure you, it was quite easy to persuade the procurement regulator that it was necessary to make this change. It was obvious. Obvious. It would be obvious to any sensible person. And while we were doing that, while we were looking at what we should do and making our case to the procurement regulator and doing all the various administrative things so we could finally reach the stage where, as Minister of Finance, I could sign the order, 2 government guaranteed borrowings were arranged in accordance with the new legislation by state enterprises. And I can tell you it was total chaos because they simply didn't know what to do and they simply did not have the expertise. And you simply don't want that Because apart from them not having the expertise, financial institutions would run rings around them, and you would not get best value for money. You certainly wouldn't. It would be experts dealing with amateurs. And there was one in particular where a very large bond that had been issued some 10 years ago was maturing in September, raised by a state enterprise with a government guarantee under a previous administration, very large sum of money. It was maturing in September, and as September approached and we began to ask the state enterprise whether they thought they could complete the transaction, do the tendering, evaluate the tenders, select a suitable financial institution that had made the best proposal, then go through the process of all those drafting all those legal documents I spoke about, the trust deed, the paying agency agreement, the subscription agreement, and so on. Whether they could do it, and eventually realized they couldn't. And we were going to default on government debt in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has the enviable reputation in its history since 1962. This country has never defaulted on government debt. We are one of the few countries in the world that could say that. So you can imagine, as Minister of Finance, I'm facing this, that a state enterprise, gently because you can't fault them, they don't have the specialist expertise, they didn't know what to do, they couldn't do it. We had to move in and we had to supplement that. We had to solve that problem with cash that had already been allocated and appropriated for another purpose. We did it. We had to do it. And we saved the day so that the debt was paid and there was no default. And therefore, we maintained our first-class, unbroken record of never defaulting on government debt. And that is because the Trinidad and Tobago government has never defaulted on debt, whether guaranteed debt or central government debt. This is why we can borrow fairly easily, both locally and internationally, because our reputation is good. So we were of the view that there was going to be a high probability continuing of compromising the management of public debt. And the result would have been, as I said, chaos and catastrophe. The other problem that we have going forward, not just refinancing of debt or dealing with debt that is maturing and has to be paid immediately, was going forward with the financing of debt for critical goods and services for the public good. Again, because of the lack of expertise outside there, it would take so long. Where the Ministry of Finance, we have expertise in the Ministry of Finance, where we can, from start to finish, put out an RFP, receive tenders, evaluate tenders, make a decision, select a financial institution, select lawyers to do the legal documentation, complete that process, receive the funds, and disperse. We can do that in 2 to 3 weeks now, Mr. President, and follow all international standards for accountability and transparency and integrity. All of it. We can do it in 3 weeks. State enterprises, from the experience we saw, that financing arrangement I spoke about, they were at it for 9 months and couldn't get it right. So it's nice to make these noisy presentations that were made by the Honorable Senator. It's nice to make these noisy presentations. Yes, histrionics. But it is clear that the hidden agenda, or not so hidden agenda, is to grind the country to a halt. And I just want to say that we have not hidden this. On page 28 of the Budget Statement 2024, I asked for a copy. I said this: I wish to make it clear that whenever necessary, we will introduce in Parliament for debate appropriate improvement amendments to the procurement legislation as unforeseen difficulties arise to ensure that the country's development program is not unduly impeded. You see, the former government present opposition. They had 28 seats in the House of Representatives. 28. They could have changed the constitution if they wanted. They could have passed anything with a 3/5 majority. Because a 3/5 majority is only 26 seats. They had 28. But in a pretense, in 2010, they introduced what they call legislative amendments for public procurement. And they dragged that for 5 years, waited until the 2020 election, making all sorts of flimsy excuses as to why they would not enact public procurement legislation. Blame the opposition, who had nothing to do with it because, as I said, they had 28 votes. They could have passed what they wanted. Drag it for 5 years, pretended that they were interested in public procurement, then passed the bill and did not proclaim it, Mr. President. Did not proclaim it. Because they knew that what they had spent 5 years working on was defective. So from time to time, we will be in this Parliament correcting the serious deficiencies in the public procurement legislation. However, I want to reiterate that the Public Procurement Act is in effect. The Office of Procurement Regulation is functioning. They are dealing with complaints. They are dealing with challenges. All of that is happening as we speak, Mr. President. And in fact, I want to congratulate the Office of Procurement Regulation for the good work that they are doing. And everything will be transparent. As I said, it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance to report to the Parliament on all government financing, whether it is guaranteed financing or whether it is central government financing. And we report in different ways. We report to joint select committees, we report in the budget documents, and we report on the floor when matters are posed to us. And therefore, I reject this motion. This motion is frivolous, it is vexatious, it is wasteful of parliamentary time. Mr. President, I thank you.
Senator Gopi Singh.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's really a distinct honor and a privilege to be here in this upper chamber at the behest of the Leader of the Opposition, and I thank her for giving me the opportunity to be here today, well, in the absence of Senator Mark, to speak a bit on this order of the Minister of Finance, which he subjected, which he put as negative resolution to Parliament. So the alert opposition, the alert leader of the opposition and her team, and the alert Senate and the lower house found out that this order was available, was there to be negatived and to go into effect immediately. And we have 40 days for negative resolution to be debated if we see it. As the Minister of Finance says, that these negative resolutions pass through, they're all on the website. But if you don't have an alert opposition, an alert team to look introspectively and deeply and to see what is available to be debated, we would miss it. And this whole aspect of the order that the Minister of Finance has brought forward by negative resolution, we picked it up. And this is why we are here before the Senate today. And we are asking the support of the independent bench to annul this order of the Minister of Finance. And the order is made by the Minister under Section 76E of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015, with the agreement of the office. Mr. President, I want to come back to that. And subject to negative resolution of Parliament, I will speak a bit on that. And the bill, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 is exemption of financing services, and I will speak about it. And this order may be cited as the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023. So the Minister of Finance had been seeking by negative resolution to exempt all financing services of the country by this order, Mr. President. And in this order, the Act means the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act 2015. And he wants to indicate the Act does not apply to the procurement of financing services by the ministry with responsibility for finance, which means the Minister of Finance and his ministry. So he indicates that the Act must not apply to the procurement of financing services for central government, Mr. President, or a public body where the financing services are to be guaranteed by the government. Mr. President, what are the financing services? I looked in the Act number 1 of 2015, and I can't find what financing services, a definition of financing services. I looked critically. All I saw was services, means any objects of procurement or disposal other than goods and works, and includes professional, non-professional, and commercial services, as well as goods and works which are incidental to, but not exceeding the value of those services. So I searched in the preamble to the bill for definition and interpretation what financial services mean. I couldn't find it. It's not there. So when the minister comes with an order and speaks of the Act does not apply to the procurement of financing services, he's being disingenuous. Disingenuous because there is nothing in the Public Procurement Act which speaks about financing services. So I had to speak to some of my learned friends who have been partners of Ernst & Young and Pricewaterhouse, senior partners in finance. And I asked them, what does financing services mean? The Minister of Finance is guilty of being open-ended in terms when he described these two words, financing services, because it incorporates everything. It could mean incorporation of anything, everything. So the Minister of Finance wants every financial issue to be exempt from the procurement regulator, everything that is financial. And this is what my friend told me. It could be, and we have the Honorable Senator, Mrs. West, Miss West, who has been with a learned team of financial management team, and what you call like Ernst & Young and PricewaterhouseCoopers and so on. And she will understand, the Honorable Senator will understand. The government financing services may include grants, contributions, and other financial assets, loans and bank borrowings of various types, loan guarantees, bonds and other financing instruments. And the Honorable Minister want to come and disturb the Parliament and tell the Parliament that financing services only mean debt financing
services. Debt financing is just one aspect of financing services. Yeah. Bonds and other financing instruments, equity, capital investments, build finance projects, which the government has done recently with a BOLD project, with the Ministry of Health around the Savannah. Tax credits and deductions, tax policy, subsidies and benefits. So, Honorable Mr. President, these are just some examples, which is why government must decide, the Honorable Minister must define the precise nature of financing services they're referring to. It cannot be open-ended.
Correct.
And so therefore we take great objection to the Minister of Finance putting in the order for exemption of financing services. So is he exempting all of these possible areas of finance? So then what's the use of the Procurement Act? It is useless. It is meaningless when the Minister of Finance seeking to remove all of these, exempt them from the procurement legislation. And this is pathetic, and the country will not accept that. Everyone in this country had been asking for this procurement legislation for a long time. And Honorable Mr. President, I am astounded to hear the Minister of Finance speak about the People's Partnership government delaying the onset of the procurement legislation. Mr. President, the Prime Minister then, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bissessar, one of her early acts and one of her early cabinet notes was the introduction of this procurement legislation. We brought that early to Parliament. I'm responding to the Honourable Minister of Finance. And one of the early areas was a joint select committee of Parliament in the first year of the UNC, of the People's Partnership Administration. In the first year, a joint select committee was formed. The Honourable Prime Minister asked me to be the first chairman on that joint select committee, which included the present Minister of Finance and the present Prime Minister. And after the first year, when we began to work and we brought down people from Jamaica, procurement regulator from Jamaica, they began to object. This PNM administration never wanted a procurement they never wanted, and this is why they are coming down to ask for exemption upon exemption upon exemption, and making the plea for all financial transactions and management to be in the Ministry of Finance. Who could trust people in the Ministry of Finance is important, but you must have an oversight of the Ministry of Finance, and that oversight is the procurement regulator. So what is it, the people, you can have a various amount of ministries, which we have about 20-something. Everyone manages their fund and so on, but some people make mistakes. And therefore, this is the role of the procurement regulator to look into and investigate if there are possible areas of incompetence or mistakes that have been made. And so when the minister says that his ministry has the people and the competence and is one of the best and so on, I wouldn't dispute that. But would you just accept that and say, well, because you have the best, you don't want the Procurement Act, you don't want the procurement regulator? And he tries to make a case that the procurement regulator does not have the expertise inside it. But they could summon expertise. They can pay for some expertise for a period of time to ascertain and determine whether a transaction, a financial transaction or a financial procurement is in line with accountability and transparency and integrity and value for money. That is why the Procurement Act was brought into place. So the Minister of Finance,
who has no expertise,
has no expertise in finance. He's learning on the job. For 8 years he's learning, but I think he's still way below.
Failing on the job.
He wanted the Ministry of Energy, yeah? because he did his master's in energy. He was disappointed he didn't get Ministry of Energy.
Engineer and Grenada Stadium
So,
fall down too.
the Minister of Finance and the now Prime Minister, for 2 years, did not attend any more procurement meetings for the Joint Select Committee of Parliament. It took the People's Partnership Government to appeal to the population, tell your members of Parliament, for Leader of the Opposition then, Mr. Rowley, and the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin, to attend the meetings. All the JCC, the Joint Consultative Council, and all the people responsible for day-to-day financing with the government and so on, responsible for ensuring that there's transparency and accountability and probity and value for money, they began to ask for them to go back to the meeting, and they came back after 2 years. So that's the third year in the People's Partnership Government. And we had to work. We brought down regulator from Jamaica. We brought down some international expertise. We were guided by what they said. And it finally came to an end in 2015 when we brought for debate in Parliament the Procurement Act number 1 of 2015, which was passed in 2015. So you could say in 3 years, the People's Partnership Government was able to bring this procurement legislation in 2015. But there were regulations to be made. And it was left to this government that has been in power since 2015 to make the regulations. And 8 years, Mr. President, 8 years between 2015 and 2023. Wow. It took them 8 years to bring this thing into fruition. The procurement regulator who was appointed, Mr. Mulilal, Mr. Lalchan, was disappointed. He was sitting there doing nothing for 8 years.
President, Standing Order 46.1. The member is all over the place and is not relevant to the motion before.
Okay, so as much as, member, you're responding to comments that have gone before, just be mindful of how much time you take up in doing that. Continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm always guided by your brilliance, and I've always congratulated you on and I take guidance from you. But I will move on. So it took them 8 years to bring this, and it was assented to or proclaimed sometime in 2023. That's this year.
Very fair regulations, unlike kangaroo.
And Mr. President, so financial services, vague. And he wants to bring everything under the ambit of financial services to exempt. And we say no. And we say that is why it must be annulled.
No.
And subject to negative resolution of Parliament, we spoke about that, my colleague spoke about it. It's subterfuge. They want negative resolution for everything. When we were in government and so on, and people ask in debates, they want positive resolution, we would grant them that. Because positive resolution means, when they were in opposition, and they asked for positive resolution, it means it has to come to Parliament for debate before it is enacted. But negative resolution, once it is put on the order paper, it comes into effect immediately. So all the things that they want to do, once they put it on the order paper, it is effective already. So that is why we had always been asking for positive resolution, but they have the majority, so they got the Procurement Act, which changed to negative resolution. They came with one of these acts during the period 2015. I think it was, I will speak about that shortly. The other issue is the central government. He said he wants the procurement of financing services by the ministry with responsibility for finance for central government. But central government means every part of every body of Trinidad and Tobago governance that uses public money whether it's central, whether it's state enterprises, corporate entities, state bodies, so that because there's no definition of central government that we could see in the Act. Nothing there as well. So where these words come from, made up. So no definition of financial services, no definition of central government. You have to imagine what is central government. And a public body where the financing services are to be guaranteed by the government. Well, thank Lord that the public body is defined in the Act. And the public body means the office of the president. So the office of the president comes under exemption from the Procurement Act, the judiciary, a ministry or a department or division of a ministry, the Tobago House of Assembly or a division of the Tobago House of Assembly, a municipal corporation established under the Municipal Corporations Act, a regional health authority established under the Regional Health Authorities Act, a statutory body, responsibility for which is assigned to a minister of government, a statutory body, a state-controlled enterprise, a service commission established under the Constitution or other written law, a body corporate or incorporated
I don't
entity.
mean to interrupt the member unnecessarily, but 46.1, why is he reading out this list? How is it connected to this motion?
So members. So, Senator Gopi Singh, please allow me to rule. What the member is doing is defining public body as it relates to the order that is in front of us. But member, as much as you're doing that, you don't need to read out all the public bodies in Trinidad and Tobago. I think the point has been properly put. Continue.
Mr. President, well, all public bodies are so wide. Money is being spent on all of them. And therefore, if you want to exempt the procurement of financial services for public bodies, it means you exempting all the finance for everything in Trinidad that spend public money. So that is free expenditure for the free for all, free for the Minister of Finance, free for the government. We spend money, don't ask for it, don't ask for accountability, don't ask for the Procurement Act and the procurement regulator to investigate that. So, Mr. President, the last area is a question of agreement. The Minister of Finance spoke about, let me see if I can get his words here, but agreement.
Quote him exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Need to respond.
He said he got the agreement of the procurement regulator. Where is that agreement? What type of agreement? Who have read that agreement? The minister could come and say anything here today. He got the agreement of the regulator, and the regulator was nice and kind and so on. I mean, I'm not casting any aspersions on the office of the regulator, but I understand that was his former permanent secretary. So I don't know. But where he got this, where he got this agreement, Mr. President, if somebody has an agreement in law, I'm not an attorney, but the Attorney General will tell you an agreement.
He's not an attorney. He doesn't know.
I know him a long time. The Honorable Attorney General will tell you that an agreement is either written or oral, verbal, and if the minister says that the procurement regulator agreed for the exemption of financial services for central government and public bodies, where is that agreement? And so that agreement is not forthcoming. So here it is, we left as a parliament in the upper chamber of the House, taken for a ride.
It would be missing file.
Yeah. So
Same place.
thank you. Senator Roberts said it would be a missing file.
In each office.
of the AG's office. So, these are some of the issues that I wanted to pick up on the order. He said the Act does not apply for the procurement of financing services and so on. And this is where we depart from the Minister of Finance and from the government, that this must be annulled, because the people of Trinidad and Tobago will not allow their money to be spent willy-nilly and just take for granted what the Minister of Finance is saying, that in our Ministry of Finance we have expertise, we have the best, and we employ the best, and they're best trained. That is for him to think. They might be, because he is so weak in his finance, anything that they tell him will be very good for him. But if you ask financial people to investigate the competence within the Ministry of Finance, they might not find it. So, but the procurement regulator, under the Procurement Act, can get the best people from Pricewaterhouse, Ernst & Young, one of these agencies, to investigate it at minimal cost. So, Mr. President, this government came with a number of amendments to the Procurement Act. My colleague, Senator Lakshmi Dayal, let me congratulate Senator Lakshmi Dayal for her tremendous performance and her work and the areas of expertise that she was able to bring forward, even being an attorney, into a financial area where she brought the relevant points to the forefront and showed where we must annul this piece of order that has been brought by the Minister. So sincere congratulations to my colleague, Senator Lakshmi Dayal, for withstanding the interruptions from the Honorable Minister of Finance. So in 2017, they came with an amendment, a piece of legislation. Then they came again in 2020, another amendment, and then public procurement and disposal of public property exemption, foreign visits, order legal notice number 206 of 2023, another exemption, and my colleague spoke about it, so I wouldn't want to go into it. That is for legal services by a public body, medical services, audited and financial statements and so on, for all of those to be exempted. And permit me, Mr. President, I just wanted to, I'll come to it shortly. I'll come back to it. So the 2020 bill, the Act introduced a new regime for public procurement, and it said what the Procurement Act is about. It repealed the Central Tenders Board Act as well, Chapter 71.
Mr. President, Standing Order 53(1)B, the member has fallen into definite repetition.
Essentially, member, what it is tedious repetition of your own arguments. Of course, what is before us, like I said, doesn't have much meat to it. You've made quite a number of points in your contribution thus far. I would invite you, if you have anything new, to bring that forward now.
If you keep beating your wife, what do you call that? Tedious? Sure. So, Mr. President, I will move away from the various acts and they brought in 2020 and in 2023. But I want to make a point here. I want to quote from the Newsday article of Thursday, 20th July, by Sean Douglas. And what he wrote about the Kamala, how many more exemptions from procurement will government seek? And he goes on, the article goes on to say, Opposition Leader Kamala Prasad Bisesa, with protesters outside Parliament before the start of a sitting of the House of Representatives on Wednesday. Opposition Leader Kamala Prasad Bisesa asked aloud on Wednesday how many more exemptions from procurement legislation would the government seek? As she spoke in the House of Representatives on the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property, Amendment and Validation Bill 23. And the article said, which excluded from the Act the items legal services, financial services, accounting and auditing services, medical services.
Mr. President, once again, Standing Order 53-1B.
So, Senator, we have heard that argument before, coming from Senator Lakshmi Dayal in the moving of the motion and from yourself earlier on. So like I said, what we're looking for is something new. You've made quite a number of points in relation to the order. And again, what we're looking for is that which is new so that we can continue. Continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I have what you're looking for, something new. I have with me, Mr. President, a copy of the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2022, Volume 1, Accounts of the Treasury, and Accounts of Receivers of Revenue of Ministries and Departments. Financial year 2022, Accounts for the Treasury Department and Division. And this is the Auditor General's report, Mr. Deputy President, Mr. Vice President. Welcome to the Chair. Accounts of the Treasury, Volume 1, Part E. And Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Statement of Loans Service under Head 18, Ministry of Finance, as at September 30th, 2022. The same Ministry of Finance that the Minister of Finance is responsible for and says that he has the best people inside there. You know where the country is now, Mr. Vice President? A summary of central government as at September 30th, 2022 owes $144 billion. This country owes $144 billion. And the Minister of Finance is coming today to ask for exemption from further expenditure.
Shame.
So where are we going to go? To $200 billion? Here it is, Mr. Vice President, $144 billion. Domestic loans, $66 billion. External loan, $28 billion. Loan serviced under Head 18, $3 billion. $98 billion for domestic loan, external loan, loan service under Head 18. Same Ministry of Finance that he has the best expertise for. Then other balances on bold projects, $232 million, a total of $99 million for central government, the same central government that he wants to exempt from the Procurement Act. $99 billion owed from the central government. And here's the other part, Mr. Vice President. Contingent liabilities as at September 30th, 2022. Loans and credits guaranteed by the state, $14.9 billion. Letters of comfort, $16.3. Promissory notes, $5.3. Open market operations, re-treasury bill, $8.4. A total of $144 billion that the country is owing. And the local loans are about $66 billion. And the external loans, $28 billion. And loan service under Head 18, the same Ministry of Finance.
But we have to trust him.
And we have to trust that ministry and trust the Minister of Finance. And so that the procurement regulator mustn't get involved inside there at all. I say it openly. I hope that my independent senators, colleagues, are listening to where the country is now under this administration, and they want exemption upon exemption upon exemption from the Procurement Act and from the procurement regulator. $144 billion is being owed by this country. And borrowings. So he wants exemption from borrowings. Borrowings between 2018 and 2022. $54 billion in borrowings.
Mr. Vice President, Standing Order 53-1B. It's the same point he's making over and over.
Senator, you are now adding some meat to your previous claims. Okay? Proceed, but don't reiterate the past. Move on.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
don't know what's wrong with this lollipop.
It comes from honor, you know. It comes from an honorable father. You are honorable as well, Mr. President.
Lollipop.
One.
Senator Gopi Singh, you have about 8 minutes remaining in your presentation. Use it wisely.
3 more lollipop.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So I have it here, statements of public debt as of September 30th, analysis of the public debt, summary of public debt. So public debt, 98 billion, local loan, 66, external loan, 28. And borrowings, this government is very guilty of. The borrowing instruments they use, bonds, which are long-term, treasury notes, which are medium-term, and treasury bills, which are short-term, with maturities of 91 days, 182, and 365. Any government will want to borrow and have treasury notes and so on. And it tells you about the domestic debt by types of instruments. The government development loans is about 54 billion. The treasury bills is about 6 billion, others 5 billion. So it gives you an explanation of where we are. And so I'll move away from the debts and so on. External debt, 28 billion. And we owing the IADB 4.4 billion, notes and bonds, 14 billion, Japanese banks, Chinese banks, we owe almost everybody. External debt outstanding by contracting currently, most of it is in US dollars, 27.9 million, 27,913 million. Yes, adding to our foreign exchange deficit. Euro, we owe, RMB, and yuan. Letters of comfort, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President.
We understand what you're saying. Can you get to some level of conclusion or expansion, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm coming. Well, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Letters of comfort, $16 billion. Loans of credit guaranteed by the states, $14 billion. So you can understand when you give the autonomy to the Ministry of Finance to do its work, borrowing $28 billion in 4 years, and then
from small pin bonds.
So from public debt, and then you have statement of the public debt, who owe to TIDCO owing, NCD Global being part of it.
Senator, you have about just under 5 minutes remaining.
Thank you for the guidance. Evolving Technologies Limited, they owe millions of dollars. Caribbean Airlines, $1.7 billion.
Senator, with all due respect, you are repeating, calling on new information. However, the point you're making is borrowing. We have gotten this far. Can you please move on to another point or move on to your conclusion in the debate, please, as it pertains to the very small window that we have here in the bill at hand, motion at hand.
So in conclusion, on that issue, all these state enterprises that owe 1.3 billion, like WASA and HDC, 3.4 billion and so on, and regional health authorities, another 500 million. And
Senator, on the opposition bench as well. The minister in his contribution alluded to the need to borrow. It is an established fact. You're reiterating his fact. Can you please conclude?
I'm saying he needs to borrow, but he wants to borrow without the process of the procurement. So you want to borrow under freedom. So I wonder why he's afraid to have to account to the procurement regulator and the procurementer. So why is he really afraid?
Billions of dollars.
So we owe $140-something billion, and you want to spend another 30 or 40. We owe 50-something billion, borrowed 50-something billion in 4 years. So, Mr. President, in closing, the evidence abounds to show that the government and state enterprises have in the past entered into financial transactions that were inappropriate and too costly, which would have been avoided if financial professionals had reviewed the financing structures and pricing prior to concluding the contracts. And this is where the procurement regulator and his team would come in to be able to investigate and bring correctly to the forefront about the expenditures of which are being contemplated by state enterprises. So the numerous bad contracts have cost the taxpayers substantial sums, and the results could have been due to a lack of competence within the Ministry of Finance and or the state enterprises. Optimum decisions could be very costly, and the independent reviews by dedicated professionals in the procurement unit is absolutely necessary to ensure the best contracts are obtained and to shield the contracts from any iota of corruption. We want transparency, accountability, and value for money in this country with every financial transaction. So I support my colleague, Senator Wade Mark, and raised by Senator Jayanti Lakshmi for a total annulment of this order by the Minister of Finance, asking for exemption of procurement of financial services for central government and for public bodies. Well, we said this must be annulled, and we are prepared to go down the road to make sure that it is annulled. Thank you very much, Mr.
Senator Maharaj.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am grateful to the Minister of Finance for giving the context for this in response to this motion, because trying to comment on this within the letter of the motion itself is like trying to comment on Israel's war on Gaza without context. I'm also grateful to him for making the case as to why exemptions should have been subject to affirmative resolution. Because one cannot take issue with the commentary on that request for an exemption and make the point about trying to make mischief in the public if you do not come here and explain to the public why you require an exemption. This is in the interest of good governance, accountability, transparency, and it should always have been that way. This is a piece of legislation passed by a special majority and requires a higher standard. Having said that, what I heard from the minister as an explanation for seeking this exemption is that the public service and state enterprises do not have the capacity to deal with these issues. And in this particular case, the Ministry of Finance and the debt management unit had to run in there and save the day, literally save the day in a particular case involving a state enterprise. This is not very different from statements made in seeking other exemptions about the difficulty of implementing this law. But I want to say that the fault is not in the act. Let me rephrase Shakespeare here. The fault is not in the act, the fault is in ourselves. This is not an issue, the failure of people and institutions to come to terms with the requirements of this act is carrying us in the wrong direction over and over of creating exemptions as opposed to coming to terms with the requirements. We have clearly wasted, right? The government and its agencies have clearly wasted too much time when they should have been preparing for this. How can we now say that a state enterprise has come to a problem of having to place some massive order or pay some debt, default on debt, where this law is not a new law? Whereas there was supposed to be training, we were supposed to have plugged all the deficiencies within the public sector and prepared people. We are hearing over and over in previous contributions elsewhere that it came to the point where you couldn't even buy toilet paper. Well, why? Because the work, and let me remind people that the procurement regulator in the period 2020, 21, 22, he was holding all of these workshops, inviting people to get all their agents and agencies and suppliers on the system. Some units here, and I'm told that the Parliament is one, did the work. They brought in their suppliers. They got them okra with the requirements of the law, and they put them on the system so they could have had a seamless transition. We have not had any problem getting coffee or whatever it is we need to get here, or all the papers, because they came to terms with the fact that this law was going to come into effect, and there was enough understanding to know that if you did not get your ducks in a row, you're going to have problem. And we did not need to have that unit rushing like a knight in shining armor to save a state enterprise that is at the level of placing massive, taking on massive debt. So we have a problem that is not in the Act. And if we do not understand why we are running into these problems, we will have to keep exempting and exempting, because we are going to come from one to the other to the other. The public is already completely disappointed that a piece of legislation for which they have begged for years, some piece of legislation to put a curb on what most people will call corruption. I don't call all of it corruption myself. I think expediency. They have already seen it hollowed out, and I can not tell anybody right now that it is not going to come here. And we need to stop kicking that particular can down the road and come to terms. If I were to suggest anything, I would gladly give the government a year. Stop the act, come to terms, this is going to happen, put your house in order, and then let us resume it. But obviously that is not on the cards. The point is the government is not prepared. Its agencies are not prepared, and therefore we are doing all of these shortcuts. I am so sorry about this, because what this piece of legislation was meant to be, it was meant to be grounded to change a culture, not just an act of corruption, but a culture of corruption that came out of expediency, that we did not have systems in place. We understand why. I don't think it's the fault of any particular government. Let us remember we were a crown colony, the first crown colony where the total source of power was in the body of the governor. Total power. We are still living that reality today where you have centralized power, and we are trying to get past it. And when you have a system like that, what you have is fertile ground for the one person who has the power to always be able to cut corners for you. So we know whether we are a society where contacts are the preferred way of getting. I mean, when your child is sick and needs surgery, and wouldn't you do anything to bump that child up the system? You look for somebody you know in the hospital. When you can't get, even people who are going, I don't know that corrupt people necessarily go and buy their license, as it were, but they try to figure out how we can get ahead. And so we have a piece of legislation that deserved the highest level of support to navigate with it in the hope that with time we can come to an understanding that this is how governments are accountable, what the value of transparency, because we need to get past and get to a place where we have a society that is based on a meritocracy. And this piece of legislation was critical to beginning to change that culture. For us to now cut corners and anything that looks difficult, let's have an exemption. I think we're going to have to start back from scratch one of these days. We can't afford that. And so I just want to ask the government, I think the government should reconsider that negative resolution because it does itself a disservice when it takes on the power in a matter involving procurement and millions of dollars that it already has like a pre-approved stamp of approval to go ahead. It doesn't make sense. You help yourself if you were to come to this parliament every time and explain to the people of the country why you're doing what you're doing. If the opposition had missed this, somebody down the road would have picked it up eventually, and it would have come back to bite you, as we say. So I'm going to just rest my case here and say that I will not support this. I will not support the exemption, because I think we are focusing in the wrong direction in doing that, and it leaves the door open if we do not deal with the public sector's refusal and truculence and inability to come to terms even with the limited Procurement Act that we have. Then we are going to come here over and over. Thank you.
Senator Dylan Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to participate in this debate. And I would probably just say ditto to Senator Maraj's comments and have a seat. But I think I have the responsibility to say a little more, because I was a part of the 2020 debate, and I supported the government in their after the government made the modifications to the bill, and I thought that enough was done at that point in time. And I would reiterate, in the 2020 bill that was brought, financial services was initially put as one of the areas for exemption. And at the end of the debate, just as the minister said, the finance minister said, after the committee stage, changes were made, and that resulted in the changes that said debt financing services for the national budget rather than general financial services. I was also a part of what happened here earlier this year when the other thing that happened in 2020 was that it was moved from negative resolution to affirmative resolution in that debate. And that the act, therefore, of 2020 said, subject to affirmative resolution of the Parliament. In July this year, we sat in this Senate until about 2:30 a.m., debating from 10 a.m. one day to 2:30 a.m. the next day, and that was changed. The discussion at that point in time, and as the minister said again, the minister had to now get the concurrence or approval of the procurement of the office before bringing any exemptions. And that was done this time, according to what this particular legal notice said. It is with the concurrence of the office. So that aspect was fulfilled. But we are bringing back what we had in 2020, financial services. And again, I agree with Senator Gopi saying we do not have a definition in the Act or anywhere as to what financial services mean. And it is indeed very broad. So we brought that back, and yes, the minister is saying that many things could not happen with the bill. But I agree with Senator Maraj that every step of the way, it seems as though we are just putting obstacles in the way to this bill, to this act being fully being carried out in the way that it is supposed to be. Every time we meet an obstacle, instead of going back to the principles, we are moving the thing from where it initially was supposed to be with the Office of the Procurement Regulator and bringing it back to the Minister of Finance. I remember, again in 2020, earlier this year, the minister did say that he will have to come back from time to time, but not for the same things, Mr. Vice President. Not for the same things that you would have discussed before and agreed that would not be that would not be a part of the exemptions. And it is really, as far as I'm concerned, much too wide for my liking. But the minister also, the fact that the minister is saying that it is all lies within the ministry, all the technical competence and stuff like that. Again, when will that change? Are we going to just whittle down as far as the Office of the Procurement Regulator is concerned? And I would like to ask the minister also one question. If it is that the Minister of Finance and it's my end of my 5th year here now. I'm always hearing about what this opposition did when they were in government and how they did this and did that and made so many, they did so many things that were not financially right. You are going to put something like this and leave it so that if you are not in government, it becomes the purview of another Minister of Finance to now be responsible for this, when you say that in principle you accept the independence of the procurement regulation, the Office of the Procurement Regulator. It's not adding up, Mr. Vice President. So I would say I think people know by now, when I have something in front of me, I look for what people intend. And when in 2020, I looked at what was presented, I looked at what the changes were, I agreed with it. When they came back in earlier this year, the same thing happened. They brought resolutions again. The minister went again and made changes, and now we are going back to where we were. It means to me that it seems to me that really and truly there is no intention, no real intention to comply with this, because it's not adding up. Every step of the way, there will be reasons as to why it should not happen, rather than building the independence of the office that has been put into place and the government says it agrees with. Building that competence within there, rather than just going back to what you had before. Mr. Vice President, I am not sure. I cannot understand, and therefore I cannot accept this. I cannot accept the legal notice that has been presented, and therefore I have to agree with the opposition that it should be annulled. Thank you.
Senator Lakshmi Dayal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, let me begin by thanking members of the independent bench for their contributions. I believe that they have quite succinctly responded to the issues raised by the Minister of Finance. And they have quite succinctly, I would say, they have done my job for me, so that I too feel that I could stand up and say ditto and allow this question to be put. Because what Independent Senator Maharaj and Independent Senator Dylan Remy have encapsulated quite nicely in their contributions is exactly what we have been saying for the last 8 years. The PNM is about taking us back to the dark ages. They are about taking us back in time. They are not in favor, and that is why I began my contribution reminding this Honorable Senate, reminding the country, reminding the population that the PNM never wanted procurement law in this country to take us forward and to stamp out the culture of corruption in this country. They removed themselves from the consultation process. They abstained from voting. Never forget that. So every time they come to this parliament with an exemption order, it is a means towards the end that they always had in mind from when they were in opposition. Do not bring oversight and accountability into the public expenditure of monies. That has been their mantra, and that has been their objective since 2014 when the bill was initially debated. So what we are seeing here today is just a continuation of what this government has wanted from day one. And that, I am very happy. It seems that the eyes are being opened around this chamber, and people are seeing for themselves. They are seeing for themselves what this government is really about. When Senator Mark asked me to pilot this motion on his behalf, and I realized I have to wind up, I was a bit uneasy, because usually I'm accustomed to, I stand up, I make my contribution, and then that's it. I could relax. I don't have to think and listen to everything that is being said and so on, and try to respond quickly, and think quickly. And not that I like a challenge, but, I felt a little bit, usually that is Senator Mark's job with his experience and so on, and me being the least experienced person on this bench, I was a bit, uneasy about it. But the Minister of Finance made my job so easy because he came here with zero substance. Not a single actual modicum of information or justification for this. You know what the Minister of Finance came here to say? You see, my ministry and what do you call it, Public Debt Management Division, we is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I love them, they're real good, and nobody should interfere with them. That is what the Minister of Finance has come here today in response to this motion to say, is why he is exempting all financial services, and I'm glad the independent bench has also picked up on it. Financial services, and the definition in this order is so broad. It is billions of dollars. It is billions of dollars that will be borrowed, that could be accessed by state enterprises and so on, and only the minister and his ministry should be able to participate in that process with no oversight. The other thing that I think was the point that was well made is that rather than try to build competency within our state agencies, the minister has come and said, see them people in them state enterprises, they don't know what they're doing. Yeah, like everybody except he bright, Duncy Head. He's the only bright one. So he's the only bright one in the whole public sector, and he's the only one who has the ability to engage in financial services. And count the money. And count the money and spend the money. And nobody must interfere with that process, because that is his little domain, and in the little fiefdom, yes, he's in his little fiefdom, and he don't want no procurement regulator coming into his little fiefdom. That is what he has come here today to say. So I couldn't believe that I was actually anxious about me having to respond to him, but he has brought nothing for me to respond to. He has brought nothing. He says some state enterprise was at it for 9 months, couldn't get it right, and he had to save the day. So that's why he has come now to seek an exemption. That is the justification of this minister and this government for taking us back to a time before the state took a decision, the parliament and the government of Kamala Prasad Bisesa took a decision to stamp out corruption in this country and the culture of corruption. And the Minister of Finance doesn't want anybody in his little kingdom, his fiefdom, to come and interfere with the exercise of his discretion and what he's doing, because Debt Management Division apparently is where all the competence in the whole of Trinidad and Tobago lies, and only they could do what they do. I will take one issue with something that Senator Maharaj said, and I feel I have to comment on it, because Senator Maharaj said it's obvious the government aren't ready, they aren't prepared, and if she had her way, she would give them a year, and she knows it's not an option, but that she would perhaps give them a year to get their house in order. Senator Maharaj, let me remind you, they had 8 years. They had 8 years. And have come to the parliament today, just like they did on the last occasion, to say, look, you see this Procurement Act? It's too hard. It's too hard. That is what they are saying. Every time they come here, they will say it is too hard. Well, I was hearing a discussion about buses earlier. I expect by next week we will see an order saying, look, only PTSC know how to buy a bus, so exempt that. By next week, they'll say only WASA know how to buy pipe, so let's exempt that. Because everything that seems to be too much of a challenge, and where this government thinks that only certain people have expertise, they will start exempting it. So we will start chopping, and whittling away at a piece of legislation which is supposed to change the way we do business with taxpayers' dollars in this country. Mr. Vice President, it is, I repeat, a travesty, and an insult to the population, to the people who have lobbied for this, because the Minister of Finance thinks that only him and no procurement regulator should be able to understand, because nobody understands bunching of debt. Well, I want to say here, anybody with a modicum of intelligence could realize that there's a pack of fluff that the Minister of Finance has brought here today. And I know about trust deeds, and I know about hiring lawyers, and I know that it's only certain lawyers get hired and get all the work from the Ministry of Finance in order to arrange those instruments and so on. Right? That is the part that I know about as well as a lawyer. And I also know, that when they have to choose their financial institutions and so on, how it is done, and when you choose people to arrange the bonds, when you choose people to do all sorts of different things that is involved in this process. But the fact of the matter is, if we want to change the way we do business in this country, we must be building competence, not exempting people and saying, don't worry, you ain't know what you're doing. I go do it for you. That is what this exemption order will amount to, based on what the minister has said. So, Mr. Vice President, I am certain that based on everything that has been said today, and even if the Minister of Finance doesn't feel that we on this bench in the opposition have the intelligence to understand what he is saying, I repeat, anybody in the entire country with a modicum of intelligence could realize what this is really about. This is really about this government in the last days trying to get away from transparency and accountability. In the last days, on the way out, on their way out, to not have the level of oversight and accountability that the Procurement Act has envisaged for government spending, for certain things that have to be done. They want to be able to give government guarantees. They want to make sure that everything stays in-house. They want to make sure that, whatever they are doing, it is done in under the cloak of secrecy. You could simply listen, and I heard the minister say, and I'm responding to what he's saying about, that they are accountable to the parliament and they lay their papers and they ask questions and so on. Anybody listening to the question and answer session at the beginning of today's sitting would see that this government do not want to account for their actions to this parliament. Yes. And they don't want to account to the people. And by extension, they don't want to account to a procurement regulator. And that is why this order has been made. That is why the order has been passed. I say again, after giving an undertaking and pretending to appease the independent bench, as they do from time to time in this House, particularly, and changing the definition that was brought initially in the 2020 legislation, they have surreptitiously brought it back by way of this order. And had it not been for the vigilance of the opposition, we would have not had the opportunity to annul this order here today. I commend the leader of the opposition. I commend Senator Mark and all the other members of the team tasked with reviewing these things. The reality is that nobody reads the Gazette. People don't know. People do not know what is going on, and it is our responsibility to let them know what is going on. And the minister could come here in the most, in whatever manner he chooses and speak down to members of this House. Yes, with his typical, I wouldn't use a word like that, but yes, with his typical mannerisms. And speak down to people in this House, but at the end of the day, we speak for the people of this country. We speak for the people of this country who deserve to know that the law that they lobbied for, the law that they have asked for, the law given to them by the People's Partnership Administration is now being chopped and cut and whittled away by this government, and not one single good reason, except the fact that public debt management division is the greatest thing in since sliced bread in this whole country, managed by this particular minister. Only them understand what needs to be done, and therefore we will not build competence in state enterprises. We will not build the competence of the Office of the Procurement Regulator. We will not make sure that you have independent agencies as checks and balances on each other within this country. We will simply say, okay, Minister, you go ahead. You do whatever you want. Not today, not as my ancestors would say, not in this Janam or the next. You will not get that passed. You will not get that passed this opposition, and I ask the members of the independent bench to stand with us today, stand in favor of transparency, accountability, oversight, integrity, and stand for the people of Trinidad and Tobago and annul this order that has been brought here today. I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is, be it resolved that the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Exemption Financing Services Order 2023 be annulled. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No.
Dr. Brown? No. Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Sinanan?
No.
Mr. Hussain?
No.
Ms. West?
No.
Mr. Mitchell?
No.
Ms. Cox?
No.
Mr. Singh?
No.
Dr. Ibrahim?
No.
Mrs. Adama Ali Singh?
No.
Mr. Hislop?
No.
Ms. Bethelny?
No.
Mr. Young?
No.
Mr. Seals?
No.
Mr. Boris?
No.
Ms. John?
Yes.
Ms. Lachmidial?
Yes.
Mr. Naked?
Yes.
Mr. Lyda?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Dr. Bhupi Singh?
Yes.
Dr. Richards?
No.
Mr. Vera?
No.
Dr. Dylan Remy?
Yes.
Professor Hutchinson?
Yes.
Dr. Patasa?
Yes.
Ms. Maraj?
Yes.
Mr. Francis?
Yes.
Mr. President, the result of the division is as follows. 11 senators.
So members, Senator Lyda, the process is not yet done.
Mr. President, the result of the division is as follows. 11 senators voted in favor for, 17 members voted against. The motion is not carried.
Honourable Senators, the results of the division are as follows. 11 senators voted for, 17 senators voted no, and there were 0 abstentions. As such, the motion is not carried. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for one matter to be raised on the motion for the adjournment of the Senate. Senator Vera.
Mr. President, today marks 1 month since Hamas's devastating surprise attack on Israel. I expect most of us in this Senate are alarmed by the violence and scale of destruction unfolding in Gaza. We view with anguish the high number of civilian casualties, the loss of critical infrastructure, and the horrific pain and suffering being endured on both sides of the conflict. Most of us, I believe, would like to see the United Nations or a group of countries working in tandem to intercede as peacemaker on humanitarian and moral grounds with a view to offering a viable path to peace. I acknowledge that first blood was not drawn by Israel, that Israel has a right to exist as a state, and that countries have a right to defend themselves. However, there is such a thing as excessive self-defense. When Israel declares it is going to level Gaza, when it launches a brutal siege, among other things depriving the civilian population of Gaza of water, fuel, and electricity, and when innocent Palestinian civilians are indiscriminately killed or displaced en masse, that goes beyond legitimate self-defense. And Israel runs the risk of pivoting from victim into the role of oppressor. Clearly, serious violations of international human rights laws and potential war crimes have been committed on both sides. We need these to be investigated and dealt with. We need all parties to the conflict to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law and for the United Nations to step in and take stewardship of Gaza under the responsibility to protect doctrine. Most importantly, we need the prompt and unconditional release of all hostages and for the siege on Gaza to discontinue forthwith. Because this conflict doesn't just threaten security and stability in and around Gaza. If left unchecked, it can escalate into a greater war, which would be extremely dangerous. In the event, I am concerned about our nationals in the Middle East who may be at risk by the escalating conflict. Accordingly, I call on the government to continue working with CARICOM and other responsible members of the international community in pressing for an immediate ceasefire, for the provision of life-saving assistance to those in need, and for all steps to be taken that would reduce the chances for a wider regional war. It is also my hope that our country can play a role in improving the United Nations, because what we have now is clearly not working as it should. We need to strengthen the UN's ability to protect and promote human rights around the world. We need to improve the UN's capacity to prevent and resolve conflicts. And we need a UN that can make fair, just, and effective interventions in a timely manner. This will require reform of the Security Council to better reflect the current global power balance. In an essay entitled "Israel in Search of Lasting Peace," written by former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in 1973, she counseled that if leaders could focus on the genuine needs of the people of the region, peace would prevail. Without such a breakthrough, she warned, the cycle of violence will continue. History repeats itself in the Middle East. If Israel hopes to secure lasting peace, I believe it needs to change tack. The country that Israel becomes in the next decade will depend on the political and military choices it makes now. If we hope to break the cycle of continuing violence and hate, if we hope to avoid the Gaza conflict escalating into a greater war, then warmongers and hardliners should not be allowed to call the shots. Instead, we must lend support to the President of the General Assembly, our own Mr. Dennis Francis, by insisting on sustained diplomacy towards the two-state solution, consistent with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. A solution that can fulfill Israel's legitimate needs for security and which can also fulfill the State of Palestine's legitimate aspirations for an independent state. The international community needs to help Palestine build strong governing institutions willing and able to crack down on terrorism. Mr. President, I deeply believe that in the eyes of the Great Spirit, all lives are equal. A Palestinian's life is just as precious as an Israeli's, and vice versa. When the sun rises, it rises for everyone. It is my hope that in this beautiful season of Diwali, the echo of holy chants and the festival glow of sparkling lights will inspire peace and goodwill throughout the planet in these dark and dangerous times. Thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Vieira has raised a matter that is timely, it is relevant, it is pertinent, and there can be no doubt that it is a matter of life and death for many persons. The government of Trinidad and Tobago totally condemns the killings of civilians in Israel. Over 1,000 civilians were killed on October 7th by Hamas, according to reports, and hundreds were taken hostage. We call for the immediate release of every single hostage. The government of Trinidad and Tobago totally condemns the ongoing widespread killing of civilians by the Israeli military, including over 4,000 children, according to reports. We note that up to 79 staff of the United Nations have also been killed in Gaza, along with over 10,000 Palestinians, according to reports. Thus far, there is no signal of abatement in the violence, nor a clear way forward to ending the conflict, even following meetings of the UN Security Council. The people of Gaza also face loss of power, water, internet and communication services, as well as interruptions to supply of food and medical attention. We call for an immediate cessation of the bombings of Gaza and an immediate end to attacks on civilian infrastructure, including attacks on hospitals, schools, and other facilities. Mr. President, COFCOR, the Council for Foreign and Community Relations of CARICOM, meets tomorrow for virtual discussion and furtherance of CARICOM's position on this very matter, and I will be robustly participating in those discussions. I assure the Senator I agree with him that diplomacy and dialogue must prevail, and there must be a strong role for the United Nations in finding a solution and an end to this cycle of violence. Mr. President, the matter raised refers to assistance for Trinidad and Tobago nationals at risk of this escalating conflict. It's a matter of public record that early in the conflict, the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs received some information on the presence of nationals of our country in Israel and in the region. From the period Sunday, October 8th, 2023 to Monday, October 16th, the ministry was informed of 7 Trinidad and Tobago nationals who were in Israel when Hamas launched its attack. Information was received via telephone helpline that we specifically set up to assist members of the public, as well as a special email address, as well as information received from our overseas missions. These nationals have sought the ministry's assistance and, in some cases, advice with respect to urgently departing Tel Aviv and returning to Trinidad and Tobago. For those individuals who were able to make arrangements on commercial airlines, the ministry provided guidance on flight options, assisted with the advising on the availability of flights out of Tel Aviv and helped actually with the making of bookings for several nationals as required. We also provided information to our contacts in the region who were monitoring the security and the movements of our nationals where possible. On Sunday, October 8th, we were contacted, in fact, the minister myself was contacted by the mother of a 16-year-old girl who was studying in Israel and for whom urgent assistance was sought with departure from Israel. The ministry worked with the mother and the daughter and another family member towards securing an alternative flight from Tel Aviv. The minor was able to depart on October 9th. Subsequent to assisting with the flight arrangements, the ministry coordinated with diplomatic missions, including the EU ambassador, to render assistance during the national's journey. Our honorary consul in Istanbul, Turkey, was present at the airport in Istanbul during the young girl's transit through that territory, and our diplomatic staff at the High Commission in London met her on arrival, provided overnight accommodation during her time of transit in England, and further assistance as well. And the ministry stands available to assist with costs associated with this individual's movements. On Monday, October 9th, we were also contacted by the mother of a 48-year-old male national, informing of his presence in Israel for a religious conference and the cancellation of his outbound flight on that day. We worked very hard on this case as well, and there was success in booking an alternative flight with a commercial airline on Friday, 13th October. Sadly, that flight was canceled. Due to the cancellation of all commercial flights at the time, we liaised with a series of foreign governments to facilitate the national's departure, including the government of Canada and the government of the Netherlands. Finally, we got a booking on a Netherlands repatriation flight. The national departed Tel Aviv on Monday, October 16th, to Cologne, Germany. The evacuees were then transported by bus to the Eindhoven military base in the Netherlands, and the Embassy of Trinidad and Tobago in Brussels, Belgium, provided further assistance for the national's journey from the military base to the international airport in Amsterdam, then to Trinidad and Tobago. He returned to TNT on Wednesday, October 18th, and some expenditure was undertaken for this movement. On Tuesday, October 10th, the ministry was contacted by a particular company, Joint Integrity Management Services Limited, informing that 2 of their employees, nationals of TNT, are in Israel as they were contracted to work for an Israeli oil company. They informed that the group was making arrangements to evacuate the workers, and they were evacuated from Israel on a charter flight on Sunday, October 15th. The ministry was also made aware of the presence of 3 other nationals in Haifa, Israel. 2 of those nationals held British citizenship, and in that regard, they were successful in being booked on a repatriation flight by the British government and left Israel on Sunday, October 15th. Over the period October 13th to 21st, 2 additional families comprising a total of 5 nationals of our country registered their presence with the ministry, their presence in Israel with the ministry. These families opted to remain in Israel and have not sought return to TNT at this point in time. One family, I wouldn't go into the details of those families, that they are safe and we continue to monitor. Mr. President, the ministry also started receiving communication from other nationals in other parts of the Middle East who have wanted to register their presence with the ministry. We've been taking those registrations. I'll give examples. In one instance, an adult male sent email communication via our helpline. He currently lives and works in Lebanon with the UNHCR, has been there for over a year. He's based in northern Lebanon, and he's informed that the UNHCR has an evacuation plan to Cyprus should the situation become worse. He continues to update us. And lastly, there's another national, male, who we are informed of his family's presence in Qatar, some distance away. He informed that he's been working there since 2015. He's provided all contact details, and he's requested...
Minister, you have 1 more minute.
Thank you. He's requested the ministry's assistance with returning to Trinidad and Tobago should the situation in the wider region deteriorate substantially. At this time, the ministry is not aware of any national of Trinidad and Tobago who is currently in Gaza. We maintain our contact links. We maintain our email outreach and other efforts to ensure that we provide all necessary and available assistance to nationals in need, and particularly those who request assistance with evacuation out of Israel or any of the countries in the region. I really want to support the submission of this matter by the distinguished senator to indicate that the government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to be engaged in the diplomacy, the dialogue via CARICOM and other means. We continue to exert our leadership at the United Nations General Assembly and will always be counted on the path of peace, standing with other nations, calling for an end to this cycle of violence and doing our part. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Honorable Senators, before I invite members to bring greetings on the occasion of Diwali, I take this opportunity to remind all strongly that there are standing orders that govern everything in this chamber. How you enter, how you leave, and how you conduct yourselves within the precincts of the Senate of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Towards that end, I remind you specifically of Standing Order 51-1A, which reads, a member present in the Senate during debate shall enter or leave the Senate with decorum, and more specifically, 51-1L shall otherwise conduct himself in a fit and proper manner. I am not inclined to tolerate breaches of these standing orders as it relates to this Senate. Be so guided. Leader of Government Business, who is bringing greetings on the government side? Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you kindly, Mr. President. Mr. President, I bring greetings to you and I say Sitaram and Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, as my forefathers would have done. I want to also thank you for the opportunity to bring greetings to the Hindu community, one of the world's most ancient and long-standing religious traditions, and by extension, all citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, on the occasion of this year's impending Diwali celebrations 2023. The Festival of Lights, which is the 58th Diwali public holiday since the festival was granted public holiday status in 1966. Taking place on the 15th night of the dark fortnight in the month of Kartik in the Hindu calendar, Diwali celebrates the victory of good over evil, light over darkness, and knowledge over ignorance. For the whole national community, the most universally recognizable and heartwarming element of Diwali festivities is the lighting of diyas. Tradition has it that the diyas symbolize the triumphant homecoming of Lord Rama after his victory over the evil King Ravana of Lanka. And this is taken from the Holy Scriptures, the Ramayana. Other elements of festival observances include fasting, prayer, puja, and the cleaning of houses and the giving of charity. In fact, this auspicious occasion unites people of all origin and faiths and transcends religious and ethnic barriers. The promotion of light, knowledge, and charity to counteract darkness, ignorance, and evil is a theme of great relevance to our national community and indeed to the world at large. For the greater good, the values and qualities exemplified by Diwali are those to which we should all aspire. Mr. President, I therefore encourage all of us to do our parts to represent the spirit of Diwali, so that Trinidad and Tobago can overcome the ills that beset us and truly reclaim our status as the united society of discipline, production, and tolerance that our forefathers intended us to be. Therefore, honorable senators, in the spirit of light and unity, please allow me, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, my family and myself, to wish each member of this august House and all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago Shubh Diwali. May we all enjoy light, love, and many blessings. I also wish you, Mr. President, your family, and all those in Trinidad and Tobago wealth beyond material possessions, as it is the richness of the heart and soul that is most valuable to all of us. Shubh Diwali, and may God continue to bless us. Thank you.
Senator Gopi Singh.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is truly my pleasure to join in the commemoration of this very auspicious National Festival of Lights, Diwali, otherwise known as Deepawali, in this esteemed chamber of our democracy. This year, as we celebrate this beautiful, inspiring, and holy time in our nation, we must never forget the very significant role that the Hindu community has played in building our nation into this place of progress and democracy we enjoy today. Diwali, like other religious observances, transcends Hinduism since it embodies not only religious and spiritual values, but also espouses social, philosophical, ethical, and moral principles that are universal. Diwali's long and enduring legacy as a national unifying bond is well established. Hindus and non-Hindus, commercial enterprises, government and governmental agencies have all contributed to the recognition and role of Diwali in national life through hosting of a wide variety of cultural and religious events. These have solidified community and national unity to a significant degree. At the spiritual center, Diwali is a poignant reminder that above everything, we are spiritual beings, and we have the ability to realize our spiritual potential. We therefore have to strive tirelessly to evolve spiritually by eliminating even the minutest trace of any negative quality and ensuring that we can demonstrate the noblest qualities, values, and behaviors in our everyday life. The light of Diwali encourages us to light up our life by cultivating a selfless disposition. A light never discriminates. It gives its brightness to all that are in its ambit. So too, we must discover ways to be the light in society. Diwali is a symbol of the light of knowledge and eradicates the darkness of ignorance. Above all, Diwali's central message is the love for God as the most important factor in our existence. We must fill every pore of our body with the oil of devotion, so the wick of enlightenment is lit. There is no higher purpose in life than becoming self-realized beings, and Diwali provides us with repeated opportunities to realize the divine self within each of us. Diwali therefore reminds us that as a people and country, we will always face destructive forces that threaten our stability and progress, but the light of goodness will always triumph. May this sacred, beloved National Festival of Lights therefore be the harbinger of joy and prosperity to all, and add new hope, confidence, and courage in our hearts. On behalf of the Leader of the Opposition,
Here, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa and all of us here in the opposition UNC bench, and I'm certain in the other place, we extend our most sincere Diwali greetings to you, Mr. President, and your family, all honorable members of this House and your families, the staff of the Parliament, all of your families and loved ones, and the wider population of Trinidad and Tobago. May Mother Lakshmi's richest blessings be showered abundantly upon you and yours, and may you always continue to prosper in her divine light of happiness and goodness. Jai Mata Lakshmi and Shubh Diwali. Thank you.
Senator Patasar.
Sitaram Namaste. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to bring Diwali greetings on behalf of the Independent Bench to the Hindu community and all citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The last month has been dedicated to the worship of the feminine divine. Preceding Diwali was the period of Navratri, which celebrated the triad of divinities to which Lakshmi belongs. Lakshmi represents in the Hindu tradition the Rajas Gun, which is a quality of action, the quality of will, and the quality of desire to do. She is known as the Ichha Shakti, which is quality of will. On this occasion on which we focus on Lakshmi as health and wealth, these concepts are viewed from a very holistic point of view. She's also known as Ashtalakshmi, or has 8 forms, and 8 forms of wealth are willpower, courage, perseverance as one group, material wealth, spiritual wealth, agriculture, animals, children, knowledge, and victory. So on this occasion, we nurture this wealth in all its forms. So as we move into a period today that is traditionally associated with health and wealth, may we look at it in this holistic way. Health as spiritual and mental, wealth as spiritual and mental. And as we recite the Lakshmi mantra that goes, Om Siddhi Buddhi Pradevi Bhukti Mukti Pradayani Mantra Murti Sada Devi Mahalakshmi Namostute. It says, Om Siddhi Buddhi Pradevi, giver of perfection and intelligence, Bhukti Mukti Pradayani, the giver of enjoyment and liberation. Mantra Murti Sada Devi, she who is the incarnation of sacred sound, Mahalakshmi Namostute, salutations to you, O Lakshmi. So on behalf of the Independent Bench, I extend Diwali greetings to everyone, all members of Parliament, members of this House, and to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, I too wish to join you in bringing greetings on the occasion of Diwali to be celebrated on Sunday, November the 12th, 2023. Diwali is one of the most auspicious festivals observed by Hindus worldwide. Symbolized by countless lit diyas, the collective light that pierces the night's darkness signifies hope, joy, and the triumph of good over evil. Diwali is not only a testament to the power of enlightenment, but also reflects unity and integration, since all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are avid participants in Diwali celebrations. Officially declared a public holiday in 1979, Diwali is commemorated annually in accordance with the Hindu lunar calendar. Devotees undergo a period of fasting and preparation, followed by feasting and festivity with family and friends. Being a true exemplar of a cosmopolitan people, let us now join together with the Hindu community in celebrating this joyful event. Shubh Diwali to all. Honorable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.